Chapter 1203. In the following days, if one looked at the Earth Spirit from a third party's point of view, it was easy to see that the Earth Spirit hesitated when advancing or retreating. It should be said that the Xian King hesitated. Just like the Empress thought, the Xian King was irritable and indecisive. He was often so angry that he wanted to fight for his life, but he regretted it after calming down and wanted to retreat from time to time. Then, at this moment, the Empress jumped out like a gangster who was setting up a trap. She acted like she was saying, "Come on, come and chase me." She was injured and vomited blood. She put in a lot of effort. Then the Xian King rushed up excitedly and found that he was hit in the face with a stick. Their brains aren't that good either. How did they manage to drive all of you to this place in the first place? Sometimes, the Empress would speak to the air with a teasing tone. Of course, this was just a small song to kill time. The human race wasn't facing the Earth Spirit, which was only a middle-level race. To be honest, some of the Earth Spirit's abilities were very powerful, such as taming beasts and sharing lives. If the human race had this unique ability, who would dare to say that they were a middle-level race? However, it was precisely because the human race had nothing and struggled to survive that they were able to rise from a low-level race to a middle-level race. This could be considered as having a disadvantage for every advantage. 1 month later, the Earth Spirit lost more than half of its people in the Red Jade Valley. The Xian King finally understood that in this strange area, they were led by the nose by a strange opponent. Even if they were all wiped out, they couldn't do anything to that extremely fast human woman. The remaining people finally began to retreat. No matter how the Empress performed, the opponent didn't move at all. The Empress stood on the top of the mountain and watched them go back the way they came. She didn't feel any sense of victory. Compared to the total number and strength of the foreign races, these enemies were nothing. The Empress connected the radio and said, "Don't do anything over there. The enemy is going back." Thousands of miles away, dozens of people were scattered in a forest. Ma Hongyu gestured to them. Standing at the top of a tree, they could see the gap in the wall of two worlds in the distance and the few Earth Spirits who stayed there. "Have you decided to let them go?" Ma Hongyu asked. The reason why Ma Hongyu asked this was that she had two ideas on how to deal with the Earth Spirit this time. One of them was to use all kinds of weapons and methods to exterminate the Earth Spirit tribe in the 60,000 mountains. This way the losses would be minimal, but the downside was that once the outsiders realized this, they would most likely attack en masse. The other way was to weaken the Earth Spirits with many methods first, and then use weapons, spears, and flesh to resist the Earth Spirits' attacks. They would pretend to be able to repel the Earth Spirits with great difficulty, and they would pretend to be weak. That way the outsiders would look down on the human race. Even if they attacked again, it wouldn't be to the point where the human race couldn't handle them. The price was a large number of casualties. The Empress had always been against the second method, but it seemed like she had changed her mind. The Empress's eyes flickered and she replied in a cold voice, "I've decided. We need more time." "Okay, we'll go around it." Ma Hongyu turned off the radio and let out a long sigh. With a gloomy look on her face, the Empress took out the remaining half a bottle of erguoto and poured it into her mouth. He let out a breath, wiped his mouth, sniffed the wine bottle and followed the Sage King. It was hard to watch the enemy leave and be prepared to send their own people to their deaths. Which bastard said that the merciful should not command an army? I'll kill him first. I'm requesting to go to the front. Even if I have to sacrifice my body, I can't let your majesty get hurt. Although I've always disliked this old man, I still agree with him. Since I'm here, how can I let your majesty take the risk alone? Great Xia says that a gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall, but an emperor shouldn't put himself in danger. Ren Baqin looked at Qin Xuan and Tong Jingye before asking seriously, "Was this written by Tong Lan? How many days did she memorize it?" "Prince, are you looking down on me? One night is enough." Tong Jingye looked proud, but Ren Baqin didn't know why he was so proud. "You'll be a burden even if you go. You'll be sending blood." Ren Baqin waved his hand. "Moreover, the danger has passed and the Earth Spirits are heading back. Even so, I'm requesting to go. As the Minister of War, I can't hide in the back when the two armies are at war." Qin Xuan shouted loudly. "Old bastard is right." Tong Jingye praised him and changed the way he addressed him. Qin Xuan didn't realize it. "What about the Ministry of War? If you pick the mule, what about the others? Do your own thing first." Ren Baqin wanted to kick these two out. He was already busy, but they still came to make trouble. "What's wrong with that great Xia man? Why can he go and we can't? With his small body, I'm afraid he can't even take a punch." Qin Xuan said indignantly. Ren Baqin rolled his eyes and roughly knew what the problem was. Invite Marquis Su here. Ren Baqin said after some thought. A moment later, the chubby former Marquis of Great Xia appeared in the palace. He looked at the tall and fierce-looking Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan with his small eyes and broke out in a cold sweat. Heaven took pity on him. Anyone here could hang him up and beat him up. Marquis Su, I invited you here because I have something to ask you. Ren Baqin turned around and said pleasantly. Your Highness, don't mention the word Marquis. Su Yu wiped his forehead and smiled flatteringly. What does your Highness want to ask? Sir Qin, did anything happen on the way home? Ren Baqin asked with a smile. Su Yu's face immediately froze. How should he answer this? Did something happen or not? If he answered that something happened, he would definitely be fine. However, looking at the other party's bulging muscles, he was afraid that he would be beaten up. If he answered that nothing happened. Looking at Ren Baqin's expectant gaze, Su Yu immediately smiled and said, Your Highness must be joking. How could anything happen to Sir Qin? Ren Baqin nodded with satisfaction. Sirs, please go back. Exenge, send the 2 ministers out of the palace. Ren Baqin immediately asked them to leave. Qin Chuan's face twitched. He stared at Ren Baqin for a long time but didn't understand what he meant. Finally, he glared at Su Yu, swung his sleeves and said, Your Highness, you have to give me an explanation. I will give you an explanation soon, Ren Baqin said with a smile. Then he waved at Exenge and whispered in her ear, Follow Sir Qin and see if anything happens on the way home. He also wanted to see how good Su Yu's poisonous healing skills were. Exenge looked at Ren Baqin in surprise. Although she didn't understand, Exenge's strength was that regardless of whether she understood or not, as long as she was instructed, she would definitely do it. Sirs, please. Exenge cupped her hands and said with a cold face. Qin Chuan snorted and left. Tong Jingye rolled his eyes, looked at Su Yu and then looked at Ren Baqin. He smiled, cupped his hands and walked out with his hands behind his back. The old fox was very shrewd and guessed that there would be a joke to watch later. When he left the palace and saw that Exenge was still following him, he glared at her and asked, General Exenge, why are you still following me? This world belongs to Her Majesty, not you. Exenge looked at him coldly. Qin Chuan snorted and didn't move. He couldn't respond to this. After getting into the car, they didn't go far before the car suddenly accelerated and drove forward. The driver was shocked, stepped on the accelerator and pulled the steering wheel. The car didn't stop and the steering wheel fell off. Looking at the steering wheel in his hand and the wall that was getting closer and closer, the driver quickly shouted, Sir. Without needing him to say anything, Qin Chuan kicked open the car door and jumped out. The car crashed directly into a telephone pole. The cement telephone pole directly fell down. The car was completely scrapped, but the driver was fine. Since they hadn't gone far from the palace and there weren't many pedestrians, there wasn't a big accident. The driver climbed out of the car and said with some lingering fear, Sir, the car suddenly lost control. What the hell? Forget it. Go back to the Ministry of War and I'll take a walk, Qin Chuan said. He turned to look at the palace and wondered if that old man had done something to the Ministry of War. The cars that were sent to the Ministry of War were all defective. After walking for a short while, he heard a drawn-out shout from behind, Make way. The first shout came from more than 100 meters away, but the second shout came from behind him. Without turning back, Qin Chuan moved and appeared a few meters away. Honeysuckle rode his bicycle at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. If it were someone else, they would probably be able to see his back. However, Qin Chuan didn't have the time to pay attention to Honeysuckle's back. Another bicycle that was racing at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour directly hit Qin Chuan's buttocks. Or rather, Qin Chuan just happened to appear in front of the other car in a flash. Qin Chuan, the young girl who flipped through the air, finally stabilized her body in the air. When she turned her head and saw that it was Qin Chuan, she was sweating profusely. She didn't dare to stop and ran away immediately. Chapter 1204. For the next 10 days, the laboratory conducted various tests on Su Yu. The laboratory staff looked at Su Yu as if they were looking at a precious specimen, causing him to tremble every time they stared at him. Pitiful, weak and helpless. A Marquis of Great Xia could actually express such feelings, which could be considered a weirdo. Su Yu's intelligence wasn't weak. In fact, it could even be said that he was quite strong. Although he wasn't a typical military strategist, he could be said to be powerful when paired with his poisonous healing ability. However, the most amazing thing was his ability to pretend to be a coward. This could also be said to be his biggest weakness. He was too cowardly. According to him, I clearly know that you won't do anything to me, but I'm afraid. Everyone, you must hit harder, harder. From this, one could see what kind of person he was. His ability is very similar to that of the Bichi, but he doesn't need to be in direct contact or seen. It's a little like a verbal command, but it's the opposite. Rinpoche carefully read the report on the table. The range of influence can reach up to 500 kilometers based on his situation in the Great Xia army, but as the range increases, the effect will decrease. The effect will be affected by time. The longer the time, the lower the effect. The magnitude of the effect will be affected by the strength. For a cardinal heaven expert, he will at most encounter some accidents and suffer some minor injuries. The duration is also very short. If the strength is too high, it will also cause a backlash. For example, when he exerts influence on Jinren Li, it will cause a backlash. This effect should be related to his own strength. The effect is better on targets with a small gap in strength, and the effect is minimally affected by the number of people. For example, one Kismet Heaven expert may receive an effect with an index of 5, 100 Kismet Heaven experts will receive an effect with an index of 4. 8 and 10,000 Kismet Heaven experts will receive an effect with an index of 4. However, we speculate that there should be a limit. If this limit is exceeded, he is likely to suffer a backlash. However, his ability has some other strange effects, such as affecting people's judgment. Rinpoche's expression changed. This is a little interesting. After hearing about Su Yu's situation from Qing Lian, he had this conjecture, and the laboratory had now fully confirmed it. The laboratory did an experiment by changing the positions of 3 poker cards on the table and then finding one of them. Ever since Su Yu came here, no one had ever picked the right card. Even if they weren't fast enough and even if they were staring at the card, they would somehow change their minds when choosing. There were all sorts of reasons for changing one's mind, such as forgetting, seeing wrongly, feeling that one was right, intuition, or many other reasons. This also proved why Great Xia would always inexplicably lose when the Revolutionary Army fought against the Great Xia soldiers. For example, when 2 armies left the city for a pincer attack, one of them went the wrong way, or the general suddenly made some low-level mistakes. In a battle between 2 armies, this was a great killing weapon. Get ready. We'll set off for the 60,000 mountains tomorrow. In addition to playing to your strengths, you also have to show your strategic ability. Rinpoche pointed at Su Yu. I will obey your orders, Your Highness. Su Yu had always been obedient. Then he asked worriedly, will they listen to me? You just need to make your own suggestions. As for the rest, trust needs to be nurtured, Rinpoche said meaningfully. Understood. Don't think too much and just do what you have to do. The most important task for you is to improve your strength and reach the spirit wheel level. Rinpoche waved his hand. Su Yu immediately looked bitter. It wasn't easy to reach the spirit wheel level. He knew what kind of talent he had and that the man wheel level was already his peak. I will arrange this. Rinpoche decided that even if he had to use the whip and pile up heavenly treasures, he would still reach the spirit wheel level. After Su Yu left, Rinpoche fiddled with a pitch-black crystal ball in his hand. Looking carefully inside, one could see a figure inside. It was a woman sitting cross-legged, surrounded by darkness as if she was in an endless void. The woman's appearance was slightly blurred, but it gave off a sense of familiarity and intimacy. Anyone who saw the figure in this crystal ball would feel the same way. It took a lot of time on Earth to make this. The woman's appearance was finalized after countless calculations. It was filled with all kinds of characteristics of motherhood and fantasy. Anyone who saw it would have the same feeling: peace of mind, warmth, admiration, and so on. In addition, the biggest feature of this crystal ball was that it could see the same scene from any angle, which was the front of the woman. Whether it was up or down, left or right. This alone took countless people and countless efforts to finally achieve. The identity of the woman in the crystal ball was the Ajadi matriarch. After the breakthrough in technology, it wasn't difficult to make crystal balls. Rinpoche made thousands of them and prepared to send them to the 60,000 mountains and find an opportunity to hand them over to Lin Dong. With this thing, he believed that it would be easier to preach. This kind of technology was considered high-end even on Earth, let alone in this world. It was enough to be regarded as a treasure, and it was easier for people to recognize the Ajadi matriarch. At most, other people would hang a portrait or make a sculpture. How could the effect be as good as this? There were no blind spots and only one side could be seen from any angle. This was in line with the identity of the Ajadi matriarch. Father, what's that in your hand? A yo-yo. Honeysuckle bounced in and saw the ball in Rinpoche's hand. Rinpoche was so angry that he almost laughed. Nonsense, have you ever seen such a big yo-yo? Let me see. Honeysuckle was always very interested in the things that Rinpoche fiddled with. Children were very interested in the things that their parents always fiddled with, such as cell phones and tablets. Honeysuckle was no exception. Rinpoche threw it to her and said, "I'm going to the south tomorrow. Come with me." Okay. Honeysuckle grinned and squinted her eyes when she heard that they were leaving the capital. After a while she was surprised and asked, "Who is this woman? Father's old lover? She's so beautiful." Nonsense. Rinpoche wanted to slap her. Why was this child so mischievous? It can actually follow my point of view? Is this the technology of sight sensing? Honeysuckle turned her neck and looked left and right, but she couldn't see the back. The more she couldn't see, the more she wanted to see. She simply thought of a way to put the crystal ball on a cylindrical flower stand and then circled around it. It was as if there was a tornado in the hall. After half a minute, Honeysuckle stopped and looked surprised. Is technology so advanced now? She rolled her eyes and smirked. "Father, this thing can sense sight, right? If two people look at it together, will it spin? Like a spinning top? You can try." Rinpoche rested his chin on his hand and smiled. After a while, after Rinpoche's experiment was fruitless, Honeysuckle found a mirror and realized that no matter how she looked at it, she could only see the front. At this time, Honeysuckle was a little surprised. "What is this? Ajati matriarch." Honeysuckle immediately put the crystal ball in front of Rinpoche and put her palms together. "Amitba." Rinpoche shook his head slightly. This child was too mischievous. In Chuan City. This had always been Dayo's largest base in the 60,000 mountains. The Protectorate of the South was located here. When Rinpoche alighted from the plane, he heard Lu Hua shouting beside his ear, "Father, what are they riding? Are those spiders? Why are they so big? Can arthropods support such a big body?" "They're vertebrates," Rinpoche explained to Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle didn't believe him at all and looked at him as if he was joking. "They're indeed vertebrates," Rinpoche said again. "That's right, these spiders had bones." It sounded very surprising. Perhaps it was a vertebrate with the appearance of a spider, which might be more acceptable. Its body could reach 3 meters, carry more than 100 kilograms of weight, and run as fast as flying on the mountainous terrain. This was a species found in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. Due to its living environment and food, its population wasn't large. However, after 10 years of artificial breeding after its discovery, it had gradually replaced the jumping goat and mountain-gazing bird as the main mounts in the 60,000 mountains. After a while, Rinpoche saw Shiwanya rushing over in Inchuan City. After introducing Suyu, Shiwanya said, "Your Highness, we don't need a great Xia person." Shiwanya didn't belittle Suyu and simply ignored him. What could a man-will expert from Great Xia do here? Need him? Believe me, you need him, Rinpoche said. We don't need him. Come, let's play a game. Without further ado, Rinpoche took out 3 cards and showed them to Shiwanya. He then put them on the table and asked, "Which one do you think is the 3 of spades?" "Suyu? It's such a simple game. Do you think Protector General she can guess it correctly?" "Of course he can. There's absolutely no problem." Suyu kept wiping his sweat with his plump, tender and fair hands. "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Shiwanya was baffled. "If you can find the 3 of spades, I'm sure that you don't need a strategist." Shiwanya scratched his head and flipped over a card. It was such a simple question, yet. What the hell? Looking at the 3 of hearts on the table, Shiwanya couldn't believe it. "Your Highness, one more time." Shiwanya's face darkened as he felt embarrassed. "Okay. Your Highness, one more time. Your Highness, one more time. Your Highness, one more time. Your Highness." Rinpoche rested his chin on his hand and stared at Shiwanya, who was doubting his life. Anyone with a normal IQ wouldn't make the same mistake twice, right? How many times have you done it? You still say that you don't need a strategist? Chapter 1205. Your Highness, do you want to take a look at that stone gate? Shiwanya asked. No, don't overthink it. It's not your fault. Rinpoche shook his head. The stone gate was the one that Chiziding had passed through. No one knew where it led to. Whether it led to a corner of the earth, to the bottom of the ocean, or to the belly of a volcano. Although Rinpoche was very interested in the secret contained in that stone gate and Chiziding's safety was also very important, neither he nor the laboratory could spare any more energy at the moment. Everyone was like a spring that had been wound. Their nerves were stretched taut as they walked forward step by step. In particular, a lot of energy and manpower had been invested in the recent plan to use crystals on weapons. Rinpoche drew a line on the map and then a circle. Get people to explore in this direction along the coastline. Our navy has built a forward base there. The maps of this era weren't very detailed, especially when the area was completely covered in a fog that hadn't been opened yet. Our navy. Shiwanya chewed on this sentence. Dayo was mountainous and originally didn't have a navy. However, the fact that Dayo's navy had already crossed the Qin nation and reached the 60,000 mountains shocked him. Taking the waterway was naturally much easier than traversing the rolling mountains. Although it wasn't comparable to airplanes, it was still difficult for airplanes to transport large amounts of people and supplies. Understood. Shiwanya nodded and prepared to go back to make arrangements. What do you think about transferring a military advisor to you? Ren Baqin asked. I still don't think it's necessary, Shiwanya said frankly. But your brain isn't working well. Ren Baqin looked at him with a faint smile. Shiwanya was speechless. Where am I? Where am I? What have I experienced? Don't underestimate him. He's very useful. You will know in the future. Ren Baqin laughed. Then he ordered, get someone to deliver the things I brought to Lindong as soon as possible. Nothing must go wrong. After Shiwanya left, Ren Baqin looked at the map. The Earth Spirit tribe was still 7,000 kilometers away from Qinggu's encampment. At their current speed of 60 kilometers a day, it would take another 4 months. The Aboriginals had already set up quite a number of traps along the way. Most of them were landmines, but there were also explosives that could collapse mountains and rivers. This was to create a large number of casualties and increase the burden on the Aboriginals. In addition, they had also killed and driven away a large number of wild beasts in the area, forcing them to spend more time looking for food. As for the effects, they would only know when they came into contact with each other. They had to win this war, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. This was the only way to give the Earth Spirit the illusion that they could win as long as they put in a bit more effort. Only then would there be no interference from external forces. Judging from the speed at which the Earth Spirit had found them, they should be very far away. The report from Unsullied City proved that this was the case. This also meant that the Earth Spirits could buy a lot of time by going back and forth. At that time, His Majesty should be able to take that step. At the very least, the human race would have a top-notch combat power to deal with the upcoming situation. Otherwise, they would all be finished in one strike. A month later, an army made up of Earth Spirits and various ferocious beasts appeared in the mountains. From time to time, the roars and scoldings of various beasts could be heard from the team. There were flying mounts patrolling in the sky. Nothing within a 100-meter radius of the army could escape their eyes. However, it was useless for Dayo. All they had to do was watch the surveillance footage underground or in other hidden places and send it to the rear. After the Earth Spirit's troops left, someone went to retrieve the micro-surveillance cameras at the rear. They moved covertly and only retrieved the cameras 2 days after the Earth Spirit's troops left. They had been monitoring the Earth Spirit for 2 months without being discovered. Those Earth Spirits were also vigilant. They felt as if they were being watched, but they couldn't figure out where this feeling came from. They didn't expect that the sparrows on the mountain peaks and the beetles in the crevices of the rocks were actually spies of the enemy. These fellows. Wherever they go, it's as if everything has been eaten. Nothing is left. In a cave that was completely sealed with only a hole for ventilation, 2 Aboriginal men sat cross-legged. In front of them were images of the Earth Spirit's troops. They had participated in retrieving the surveillance cameras and were a little angry after seeing the areas that the Earth Spirit's troops had passed. The Aboriginals lived and died in the mountains. The 60,000 mountains was their final resting place. Everyone loved this land from the bottom of their hearts. The more we wait, the angrier we feel. Their movements are all under our control now and we don't know when they will strike. Don't worry, there will be a good show soon. What do you mean? Didn't a group of people come here a few days ago? Other than killing or driving away the surrounding ferocious beasts, they also left behind a lot of good stuff. The other man winked. This matter had been buried in his heart for some time, and he could finally talk about it now. What good stuff? Tell me. How would I know? Those people won't talk about this. I just think that they are mysterious. Before he finished his sentence, a ball of fire suddenly lit up on the screen in front of them. 100 miles away, the army of the Earth Spirit clan was advancing. Most of the Earth Spirits were very relaxed. After all, their opponents were just an exiled race and they couldn't compare to them in terms of strength. They were like fully armed soldiers with steel knives facing a group of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. At least that was what they thought. However, there was a sudden clap of thunder. Somewhere in the army there was a sudden burst of fire. Steel balls shot out and formed a storm that immediately threw the surrounding Earth spirits into a complete mess. The weakest member of the Earth Spirit clan's army was at the Kismet Heaven level, but they still couldn't react to such a sudden attack. After the first explosion, a series of explosions occurred in the army. Oh, oh. Boom, there are enemies. Are the flying troops eating sh*T? All the Earth spirits were vigilant of their surroundings and prepared to deal with the enemy's attack. However, to their surprise, no one appeared. The flying troops in the sky searched the area within a radius of a few hundred meters, but they couldn't find any traces of enemies. What exactly is going on? There are no enemies. What happened just now? All of them suddenly exploded underground. It looks like the humans were prepared for this. How many casualties are there? After a final count, there weren't many casualties. There were 10 explosions in a row, but there were less than 100 casualties and most of them were injured. The sudden attack and the fact that the enemy had yet to show up made all the Earth spirits furious. They were just waiting to find the humans and kill them. However, before they could find the humans, the 100-meter-tall cliff suddenly exploded when they passed by it the next day. Large pieces of soil and gravel fell from the cliff along with the explosion. The casualties this time were higher than before. There were more than 200 casualties. Just like before, they didn't see any enemies. After 2 similar encounters, all of the Earth spirits became more cautious. However, the reality told them that it was useless. After only half a day, there was another explosion. They stepped on a mine again. Since it wasn't. Chapter 1206. In the 60,000 mountains, there were some changes in the formation of the Earth spirit as they advanced. A few giant elephants which looked like mobile houses walked in front. From time to time, some elephants would stop and soon some Earth spirits began to dig the ground. After a while, they dug out a palm-sized ball and carefully carried it to the army. Left General, I found something. This thing. Those humans buried it in the ground and will explode when we pass by. Let me have a look. The Left General was an Earth spirit with only one eye. His other eye seemed to have been gouged out by something. This thing looks quite exquisite. What's inside? Study it and see how to dismantle it without damaging the inside. I want to see what exactly it is. Left General bared his fangs. What does it mean that there's a red light here? Beep, beep, boom. Sparks mixed with metal balls sprayed everywhere. Left General. I'm fine. Shrouded in black smoke, Left General waved his hand, revealing a face that was inlaid with countless steel beads. With a wave of his hand, the steel beads fell. To him, these things couldn't even break through his defense. Even if a Kismet Heaven expert was blown up, he would only suffer minor injuries as long as he didn't hold it right in front of his eyes like this. Search again. They must have left many behind. Those mines and bombs seem to be working well. There are very few deaths, but most of them are injured. Although they recover quickly, it takes up a lot of their energy. Their reconnaissance range has tripled, and they are advancing in a scattered formation. According to our observations, they are starting to get anxious. In addition, they deployed some giant elephants to scout ahead. These things have a better sense of smell than saber-toothed tigers and wolves. Some of the landmines were dug out by them. Although they were detonated, the existence of these things is no longer a secret to them. It doesn't matter. They won't have the chance to dismantle them, Rinpoche said indifferently. These mines were equipped with sound and infrared imaging devices, and they weren't just detonated by pressure. Even if they cut them open immediately, the core would still explode. It's also a little strange that tens of thousands of people have marched in the 60,000 mountains for so long and encountered mines and bombs from time to time, but their morale hasn't been affected at all. Rinpoche crossed his arms and casually said, "There's nothing strange about it. Life with faith is always more determined. It has been like this since ancient times." As he spoke, Rinpoche thought of something and asked, "On the contrary, they have expanded the scope of their investigation. Will the people in hiding be discovered?" That's hard to say. After all, they have many vicious beasts that we've never seen before, and we don't know what kind of abilities they have. Furthermore, after hiding in a small underground cave for a long time, one would need to eat and drink. As long as a trace is left behind, there is a possibility of being discovered, Shiwanya said. Tell them to be careful. You can relax the surveillance as much as you want. Just make sure they're moving in the right direction and if they've split up their forces. Monitoring their every move isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is to not let them discover our surveillance equipment. Once it's discovered, the first thing to do is to destroy the equipment without any hesitation. I'll have someone inform them. Since they've expanded the scope of their investigation, there will definitely be gaps. If there's a chance they'll catch some spies. Regardless of whether we succeed or not, as long as we make a move, we must retreat. Understood. Ren Baqin thought about it and felt that there was nothing else to say before letting Shi Huanya make the arrangements. Ren Baqin stretched his back and walked around the courtyard. The air in the mountains was much better than in the capital, especially because of the mountainous terrain. It wasn't as hot as the capital. He walked through the courtyard and came to another place. There was a large vat in the courtyard with a fire under it, and Suyu was stewing inside. "Ah, it's hot, 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 hot. Let me out, I'm almost cooked." Suyu was yelling inside, but he was held down by two burly men and couldn't move at all. "Your Highness, I'm almost cooked. I can smell the fragrance." Suyu shouted as soon as he saw Ren Baqin. "It's the smell of Chinese anise and Sichuan pepper, not yours," Ren Baqin sniffed and explained. Suyu was speechless. "Why did you use anise and Sichuan pepper? Didn't you say you were going to cook me?" Suyu was about to cry. "It's more effective this way." Ren Baqin laughed. Suyu wasn't very talented and he was quite lazy as well. The Rui visualization technique that the Empress found for Ren Baqin was extremely difficult to practice, and Suyu couldn't practice it at all. Ren Baqin could only find a way to force him into the spirit wheel level, by spending some time, energy and a lot of resources. Even if he became an earth wheel expert, it would be much more useful. As for the Sichuan pepper anise, it did have a little effect on the steaming and absorption of several herbs. Even if the effect was small, it was worth it. After visiting Suyu, Ren Baqin returned to his residence and went straight back to Earth. A few minutes after he sat down, he received a complaint from the school. Ren Baqin got someone to bring Honeysuckle back and asked with a serious face, "Why did you hit me?" In fact, Honeysuckle mostly bullied people on Earth, saying that he was stronger than him and that he was his little brother. It was child's play. This was the first time that he was actually reported by the school for hitting someone. They didn't believe me when I said that I had 10 days of classes a week. Honeysuckle felt wronged when he mentioned this. He puffed his cheeks like a big hamster. "Other people have 5 days of classes a week, but I have 10 days a week. No one would believe me if I told them." "How good is this? 1 day is equivalent to 2 days. I wish I had 48 hours a day." Ren Baqin said faintly. "Doesn't your conscience hurt when you say this?" Honeysuckle looked at Ren Baqin in shock. "Conscience?" Ren Baqin looked like he was recalling something. When was the last time someone mentioned this to him? Honeysuckle was even more shocked. "Have you forgotten about your feelings? When did you lose your conscience?" Ren Baqin regained his composure and asked, "You hit him because of this?" "I didn't hit him. I just lightly hammered him." Honeysuckle was a little bashful. "Then you flew out the window?" Ren Baqin pointed at her and sighed. "You aren't young anymore. Be more careful next time. Got it?" Honeysuckle rolled her eyes, smiled and said cheerfully, "Father, let me tell you some good news. Something happened to the President of the United States." "What happened?" Ren Baqin was quite interested. He had already avenged half of the previous incident. The United States was heavily guarded, and he didn't even have the chance to cause trouble there. "Search online and you will know. I'm leaving. I have an appointment with my classmates to go shopping. Don't drink too much." Ren Baqin exhorted, but it probably wouldn't be of much use. He took out his phone and found that there were a lot of emails. He opened them and saw that they were from Wang Yin, talking about the incident with the President of the United States. Once again the door was zipped open. This time it was even more sensational, especially since the woman mentioned a lot of details. For example, the time limit was only 2 minutes. The whole world was in an uproar. At the end, Wang Yin also added a small piece of news. It seemed that the president was contacting the woman and was prepared to spend 5 million yuan to make her change her tune. 2 minutes was changed to 5 minutes. Ren Baqin almost burst out laughing when he saw this. After thinking about it, he still felt that it was interesting. After contacting Wang Yin, he asked, "Has the woman changed her tune?" "No, it seems that the man has some other conditions and the intern is waiting for the right price. Give her 10 million yuan to change her tune." "Brother, what do you mean?" Ren Baqin asked with interest. "Get her to reduce the time by 1 minute." Ren Baqin was speechless. "Brother, you are really ruthless." Ren Baqin, who had been in a high position for many years, couldn't help but complain. Chapter 1207. Citibank White House. The special assistant of the president came to the door of a room and heard someone banging on the table. The man inside had been in a bad mood these days. Especially after the woman rejected the man's suggestion and said, "1 minute," in front of the media, the man almost became a laughing stock. He stopped for a moment, knocked on the door and walked in. "Have you found it?" the president asked angrily as he sat behind the desk. "Yes, it should be related to the Chinese. I thought it was those Russians. Why would they play such tricks?" The president said gloomily. "It has nothing to do with their authorities. According to our investigation, it should be done by Wanyan Ren." The president smashed everything on the table. He knew what was going on at the mention of this name. It was that damn rude bastard again. "All right, you may leave." The special assistant hesitated for a moment and didn't tell him about the 52 strange gifts that the White House had received today, including aphrodisiacs, bull penises, geckos, and other things that were said to have aphrodisiac effects in China. Needless to say, the man in front of him was going to be irritable again. He left the room and felt a little funny for some reason. Ren Baqin had already returned to Dayo. He was in a good mood after getting his revenge. Happiness should be built on the pain of the enemy. This was called political correctness. Another half a month passed. "The leader of the Earth Spirit has met up with the army," the Empress said as she sat on a tree branch. She swung her legs, looked depressed, and seemed a little bored. In fact, it was indeed very boring. There was no food, no wine, and not even a person to talk to. This month was the most boring thing in her life, even more so than when she was in the palace. "What about you, Your Majesty? Do you still want to follow them?" Ren Baqin asked. "No. If it were me, I would definitely send experts to kill them in such a situation. No matter how weak they are, they would be able to hinder their actions. Letting the other party idle would only make him feel uncomfortable. I'm going to stay in Qing Valley for a while and kill them if they send people out." The Empress said. "Your Majesty, why don't you come back and rest? If they send people out, it will be too late for you to take action. After observing them for such a long time, we already know some of their important figures. If anyone leaves, we will immediately notice," Ren Baqin said. "All right. Prepare the wine and meat and wait for our return. I'm going to give them another big gift." After chatting for a while, the Empress hung up the radio. She landed on the ground, picked a few berries and threw them into her mouth. She then rushed toward the Earth Spirit clan with a relaxed look on her face. At this time, the Sage King had already met up with the army of the Earth Spirit clan and heard about what had happened in the past few days. The Sage King's face was gloomy. "The humans are very weak, so they can only use this method to slow us down. No amount of tricks can change the difference in strength." Everyone agreed with this. It was precisely because they were not strong enough that they would use all sorts of methods to harass and obstruct the enemy. Otherwise, the human race would only need to prepare an army somewhere and wait. From the very beginning, they knew that the current human race was no longer the human race that had fought against the myriad races in the past. It was probably the difference between a husky and a husky. Advance and flatten them. The Sage King looked at his army and waved his hand in high spirits. The experience of being led by the nose by that woman until he vomited blood had been buried deep in his mind. Suddenly, a series of clear sounds came from the sky behind them. An Earth Spirit listened attentively for a moment and said, "Someone is coming from the southeast. There's only one person, a woman, and she is not covering her tracks." The Sage King's expression changed a few times, and the red figure appeared in front of him again. "Draw the surrounding situation," the Sage King ordered. After the others drew a map of the surrounding situation, he drew a few lines on it and said, "Left General, bring 5 experts and go around this side. Right General, bring 5 experts and go around this side from the back of the mountain. I will hold her back. I will give you half an hour. This time you must not let her escape." After instructing the 2 of them to leave, the Sage King sat on the disaster beast and turned from the side to the back, preparing to hold the Empress back. After a while, the Sage King, who was looking down from above, saw the Empress in red standing at the top of the tree. He roared, "Woman, you alone cannot hold us back. We will kill all the way to the territory of the human race and kill all of you." At this time, the Empress was carrying a blue backpack on her back and a metal box in one hand. She stood on the top of the tree as if there was no gravity under her feet. Go ahead." The Empress sneered and looked at the Sage King as if she was looking at an idiot. If it weren't for the fact that she wanted to buy time, if it weren't for the fear of the strong foreign races, she would have thrown a nuclear bomb at the Earth Spirit race and buried them in the 60,000 mountains. Look, even the nuclear bomb's quantifier is a tractor. The Sage King was angered by the Empress's gaze and roared, "Although you are a little strong, that is all. The strong people of my race are 100 times stronger than you, and the Black God is an existence that you can't even imagine. You have no idea what kind of enemy you have provoked. You talk too much nonsense. Just fight. The Empress twirled her hair with one hand, completely disregarding the Sage King. In terms of strength, the Sage King wasn't weak and he had an immortal body. However, in terms of fighting ability, the Earth Spirit race was basically equal to the Husky, who had the same strength as the Earth Spirit. Even though there were countless roaring beasts behind the Sage King, as well as the Earth Spirit race with angry faces and weapons. In the eyes of the Empress, these beasts were much more threatening than the Earth Spirit race itself. Don't even think of escaping this time. Seeing that the Empress was almost ignoring him, the Sage King couldn't hold back his anger anymore and instantly jumped out from the head of the giant disaster beast. He raised his hands as if he was holding something. Then he flipped down. There was a loud explosion in the sky. A hideous greenish-black arm stretched out from the void, wiping out a part of the forest below. However, before that happened, the Empress's figure flashed and appeared 1,000 meters away. It's that thing again. The Empress glanced at the greenish-black arm and threw the metal box in her hand over without hesitation. Originally, she was going to give the Earth Spirit Army a big gift, but she changed her mind. Then she retreated. As for the Sage King, when he saw the metal box thrown by the Empress and her retreating action, everything that had happened at the wall of the two worlds appeared in front of him again. After hesitating for a second whether to catch the box and throw it far away or retreat, he saw the cold smile on the Empress's face and immediately roared. Retreat, all of you, retreat. Even though he wouldn't die, he really didn't want to experience those days of festering all over his body again. In 10 seconds, the Empress's figure was like a red lightning bolt in the sky, retreating tens of thousands of meters. During this time, she still had the energy to take out a pair of sunglasses from her bag and put them on. Seeing that the greenish-black arm slowly retreating after flattening a part of the forest, the Empress pressed the button without hesitation. Boom! Another sun rose in the sky. This time, the yield was even greater than the one at the wall of the two worlds. The loud explosion and impact filled everyone's eardrums. When the Empress was thrown away by the airflow, she vaguely heard an angry growl coming from the explosion. Stay here. A few figures leaped into the sky from the forest and attacked the Empress's back. Oomph! The Empress was a little dissatisfied that her perception of the condition of her arm was affected. She snorted and purplish-red lines instantly covered her whole body. A shadow appeared behind the Empress. Get lost. The shadow smashed down at a faster speed than when it came. The Empress was also hit and bounced into the sky. A few other figures followed. The eyes of these Earth Spirit experts were red and they bared their fangs. However, before they could catch up with her, the Empress took a step in the air, paused for a moment and dashed in another direction. She glanced back from the sky and saw a huge mushroom cloud blocking her vision. She didn't know how much damage that arm would suffer. Chapter 1208. At about the same time as the Empress made her move, another massacre was going on at the wall of the two worlds. The giant garden flower crushed the skull of the Earth Spirit in front of her, licked her finger and looked around with a bloodthirsty gaze. Dongwasun suddenly appeared from the shadow of a tiger-shaped beast as if he had emerged from the water. He cut open the beast's abdomen with his dagger. Behind a few Earth Spirits who were resisting stubbornly, a mirror silently appeared in the air. A whip lashed out from the mirror and grabbed the neck of an Earth Spirit, dragging it back. After the upper body of the Earth Spirit was dragged into the mirror suddenly shattered. Only the lower body was left. More than 10 meters away, the upper body of the Earth Spirit struggled for a while before dying. This battle didn't last long. After all, there were only a few Earth Spirits left here, and they were wiped out without much resistance in the face of the elite human forces. In the distance, Ma Hongyu held a green balloon between her fingers and gazed into the distance. Inside the balloon was a ferocious bird with sharp beak that was darting left and right. This was a messenger bird sent by the Earth Spirit. Pack up. Li Fu looked into the distance. According to the previous arrangement, some of you will follow me back to fight the Earth Spirit. The others will return to where they were before and focus on training without caring about anything else. Next time it's up to you. Ma Hongyu bowed to Li Fu. Be careful. It doesn't matter if my old bones are buried in front of the army. Li Fu smiled. However, it should be fine this time. After all, the rear has made a lot of preparations and these Earth Spirits aren't very strong. Even so, swords are blind, Ma Hongyu said in a deep voice. It's not up to us. Li Fu shook his head. So what if they knew that swords were blind? Some things had to be done by someone. It had nothing to do with whether they wanted to do it or not. It had to be done. At this time, Rinpoche had arrived at the only city in the 60,000 mountains, Anchuan City. Even though it was still very far from Jianghu, Anchuan City was already filled with killing intent. The entire army of the Protectorate of the South had withdrawn to train every day, and the battle cries were deafening. In the Protectorate of Anchuan City, Rinpoche sat in the seat of honor and looked down at the people below in silence. After a while, a tall man stood up and said, "Your Highness, I am willing to go." "Forget it, your unit can't take a beating. I'm afraid you'll be beaten up in 2 or 3 times. It's better for my unit to go." Another big man sneered. "How about we have a match now? Let's compete then. Who's afraid of who?" "Alright, stop arguing." Shiwanya's face darkened as he suppressed the two of them. Rinpoche looked at the people below and sighed in his heart without saying a word. But the merciful did not command an army. If no one took the initiative to charge to their deaths, the entire Protectorate of the South would be buried. Those who didn't know better would think that they were fighting for something good, but who would think that they were fighting for their lives? That's right, this was a suicide mission. To be more accurate, it was a suicide mission. There was no doubt that he would die. There was no chance of survival. "What does your Highness have to say?" Shiwanya turned to look at Rinpoche. "Generals." Lord Lu rose and cupped his fists in greeting. "Some things need to be done. Your Highness, we naturally understand this. We were born and raised here. If those foreign races want to contaminate this place, we have to be the first to step forward and risk our lives. It's not a pity if we die. If we die in this mountain, we will definitely enter the ancestral hall in the future and protect the tribe," the big man who requested from the start said. "You're right." The others laughed along, but it wasn't an impassioned and stirring one. Instead, it was an indifferent look at life and death. However, the more it was like this, the more Rinpoche felt that it was a pity. Suppressing the unbearable feeling in his heart, Rinpoche calmed his emotions, raised his head and smiled. "You sound like you're educated. When I was guarding Longsho City, I often listened to them talking about books. Furthermore, I was thinking that this story of mine might be passed down in the village. Hundreds or thousands of years later, I'll also be a hero in the village. When the time comes, the future generations will say that ancestor Wu Dian, when faced with the foreign races, only left behind a sentence like, 'Oh my gosh, there are so many of them.' Isn't this embarrassing? Can't I think of something nice to say?" Everyone burst into laughter. As Rinpoche laughed, he felt a little sour in his heart. These aboriginals usually stirred up trouble and were barbaric and rude. However, when it came to critical moments, they were straightforward and adorable. They laughed at life and death without any hesitation. If possible, he really wanted to send the Great Xia people to the front line. Unfortunately, this was impossible. It can be passed down. Not only in the village, but it will also be passed down in books. In the future, your descendants will have books to read, meat to eat, and literacy. Thank you, Your Highness. Rinpoche shook his head. This is what Dayo should give you. Returning to his seat, Rinpoche said in a deep voice, "Captain Wu Dian, Captain He Ling, immediately lead the troops to Jiado Stream to prepare for the foreign race's attack." "Yes, sir." "Xing Qian, lead the troops to transport the explosives to Jiado Stream. After planting the explosives, meet up with the engineering team that retreated from the front line and retreat to Mount Zhuping." "Yes, sir." After Rinpoche made the arrangements, everyone obeyed and left. "How many villages are there under our control? How many people?" Rinpoche asked after everyone left. "There are still tens of thousands of villages with 8 million people." Shiwanya spread out the map and drew a circle with his finger. "Most of the villages were within this range. Do you want them to evacuate?" Rinpoche shook his head. "With so many people, it would be difficult to settle them down in a short period of time. Furthermore, if all the aboriginals in this large area were evacuated, it would soon be occupied by wild beasts, destroying the mountain roads and some facilities that had been painstakingly opened up. Evacuate 1/3 of the villages and merge some of the smaller villages together. There can't be more than 1,000 villages. Such a village is too big. If we want to hunt enough to feed the people in the village, we need to double the area of activity. Doubling the area of activity would consume more time and food, reduce the amount of food brought back at one time, increase the number of hunts and face more dangers. In addition, the most troublesome thing was that the distance of the journey was too far. By the time the prey was transported back, it would already be rotten and smelly. 10,000 villages are too many. Even if we reduce the number by 1/3, there will still be too many left. After this victory, the 60,000 mountains will become a battlefield, and too many villages won't be conducive to mobilization. Furthermore, there are too few people in each village, which isn't conducive to the development of local industries. You can make the arrangements for merging the villages first. After this battle, you can transfer a batch of spider beasts to them. At the same time, you will transfer agricultural talents to teach them how to cultivate terraced fields and grow food. This will reduce their food pressure. In addition, open up the sea route from Wangjing to the 60,000 mountains, and then transport salt by air. This will reduce the price of salt to a certain level, and they can marinate and roast their prey into jerky. Finally, the 60,000 mountains are rich in resources, but they aren't being used at all. I plan to develop some industries nearby and build several large cities. This will reduce the transportation of supplies from the rear to the front, and the empty transportation route can also transport some food. Ren Baqian briefly explained the matter to Shiwanya, even though he knew that Shiwanya wouldn't understand. However, he wanted to tell him that he already had a complete set of arrangements. Shiwanya was relieved after hearing this and immediately accepted the order. That evening, Anchuan City began to move. Early the next morning, groups of soldiers filed out of Anchuan City and headed south. Soon after, groups of spider beasts and forkhorn cows carried goods and headed south under the escort of the army. Even some of the aboriginals in the city felt that a storm was brewing. Chapter 1209. A group of earth spirits was walking in the forest. Squeak. A yellow-skinned rat with a rope tied around its neck, which was walking at the front, suddenly stood up and sounded an alarm. Those humans stopped here. Check it out. Be careful. Those damned flies. They are so weak that we can kill them with one slap, but we can't catch them, another earth spirit complained. Over the past 2 months, they had been constantly harassed by the human race. Mainly they found things that could explode underground or on the cliffs. They would suddenly explode when walking, eating, hunting, and even when going to the toilet. These exploding things seemed to have been spread all over the 60,000 mountains by the human race, and they were everywhere. Although there were not many casualties, the impact on the earth spirits was significant. After all, no one liked to be blown up while they were walking. Blown up in the middle of a meal, blown up in the middle of a poop, their speed was inevitably affected. After a long period of harassment, their morale began to decline. After all, the earth spirits had emotions too. They had the ability to calm down and they weren't robots. They stayed here for about half a day and ate. There are about 10 of them. About 2 days ago, one of the earth spirits was talking. The rat seemed to have discovered something and suddenly dashed over. What's there? The earth spirit who was leading the yellow-skinned rat suddenly shouted. When he followed the mouse to its destination, he turned over the grass and saw a malicious face carved on a stone. Oh no! Boom! A ball of flame expanded and turned into a fireball. 8 bottles. The other earth spirits saw broken limbs flying over before they could rush over. Damn it! It's more powerful than before. 22. Someone suddenly shouted. An earth spirit who was standing in a corner had his neck cut open by the flying fragments. They buried something different this time. It's not steel balls but fragments. It's more powerful, informed the general. However, just as they were about to turn around, one of them suddenly changed his expression. He wanted to shout, but it was too late. Boom, boom. On a mountain in the distance, someone was lying on a tree and looking in this direction with binoculars. Of the 3 lightning swords, only 4 were killed. The other 2 were injured quite badly. Should we go and catch it? Those long-haired monsters will be here soon. This place has direct observation over there, so it will definitely be the first place to be searched. Don't ruin all the traces. Let's retreat first. There was a total of 3 aboriginals. After retreating for a few hundred meters, they dug into a pit and covered their heads with rocks. Then, they retreated for a few hundred meters until they arrived at a riverside. They dived into the river and swam downstream for about 200 meters before coming ashore and running in another direction. Sage King, they've switched to a new type of explosive. It's much more powerful than the previous one, and the casualties among the outposts and roaming troops are high. We can't let them continue like this. What do you think? Those humans definitely can't carry too many explosives. They must have a lot of bases to resupply. As long as we send 2 elites to search for the human base, we can also find opportunities to attack the human base. That way they won't have any spare energy to harass us. There's another advantage to doing this. Our main force will attract their attention, and the elite teams that are separated from the main force will have a greater chance of finding them. The human race is very weak. Except for a few individuals, most of them are weak. As long as we find them, we can eliminate them. Even if we encounter that human woman, we can retreat. Yes, I have the same idea. However, we haven't decided who to send yet. I'm willing to do it. Sage King Xian thought for a moment and said, "Get the broker here." That night, 2 teams of about 12 people left the main force and disappeared into the darkness. Did they split their forces into 2 teams? Ren Baqin received the news shortly after. According to the comparison, these 2 teams should be experts, and it's likely that all of them are at least longevity heaven. As for their specific identities, we should be able to find out tomorrow by comparing their appearance and attire. Your Majesty guessed correctly. Ren Baqin smiled. It's good that they are experts. It's not easy to deal with these earth spirit experts when they gather together. Now that they have split up, we can eliminate them separately and reduce the pressure when we confront them later. For other races, large armies were the biggest threat. However, it was the opposite for the human race. It was the easiest for them to eliminate ordinary foreign races. On the contrary, the threat of these foreign race experts was much greater than that of the foreign race army. Even if they could kill one more, it would reduce the pressure. Pay attention to their whereabouts and get everyone to hide, Ren Baqin ordered. I'll inform Her Majesty tomorrow morning. Her Majesty already knows. Oh? Who informed her? Ren Baqin looked up and asked. Her Majesty is also receiving the message from the same channel. All right, I got it. Ren Baqin waved his hand, waited for them to leave, and lay down on his bed. The next morning, when Ren Baqin contacted the Empress, he learned that she was ready to hunt these 2 teams. Your Majesty, be careful. Except for the Empress, no one else could help with this matter. The group of experts who had reached longevity heaven and earth had just returned from the barrier between the 2 worlds. They were expected to arrive at Aching Valley 1 step later than the enemy and Jiado Stream 1 step earlier than the enemy, just in time for the final battle. At noon, Ren Baqin had obtained most of the information about these 2 teams. Other than their identities in the Earth Spirit tribe, he had more accurate information about their strength, appearance, fur color, and even height. It had to be said that in terms of intelligence gathering, the human race was more than 10 streets ahead of the Earth Spirit tribe. The Earth Spirits only knew that there was a woman in a red dress who was hard to deal with. They knew nothing about the human race's numbers or location. It was like a burly man armed to the teeth with a magical weapon facing a blind man who weighed 400 kilograms. There were a total of 24 Earth Spirits, all of which were tigers and wolves that were suitable for short-distance raids in the forest. Among them, the 2 leading Earth Spirits were second only to the Sage King and were at the advanced level of longevity heaven. In addition, 4 Earth Spirits were at the intermediate level of longevity heaven, and the remaining 18 were at the beginner level of longevity heaven. Ren Baqin quickly informed the Empress. Got it? The Empress hung up after receiving the message. She estimated the distance between them and estimated that it would take about half a day to travel at full speed. However, an hour later, the Empress received bad news that the target team had left the surveillance range. Now, the surveillance range was only the route of the Earth Spirit tribe. If the other party moved too horizontally, they would be out of sight. The Empress had no choice but to stay where she was until nightfall. Just as she was about to find trouble with the other team impatiently, she suddenly heard a short and mournful roar from not far away. Immediately, the Empress became alert, hid herself, and put on the energy-detecting glasses. After about 30 minutes, she saw a few huge white spots in her field of vision. The Empress revealed her canine teeth with a tinge of excitement on her face. It was really like breaking into hell. Chapter 12:10. His condition had finally recovered. However, he wasn't satisfied with the results of his new book and was currently revising it. It was estimated that the revision would be completed in 4 to 5 days. After the revision, the Empress would resume updating 2 chapters. I'm here to inform you in advance so that you won't feel that I'm a eunuch. I'll keep my word. At the same time, he mentioned the new book, Invincible Once You Appear. The female lead of this book was very interesting. As for the male lead, he wasn't bald, not bald, not bald. Not only was he not bald, he even had hair, eyebrows, and a bird's nest. Other than the growth rings on his penis, everything else was perfect. The gigolo of the Empress's family. I'll resume updating 2 chapters in 4 days. Currently typing, please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 12:11. Keep your eyes peeled. We have made a big detour and should be near those guys who have been laying traps. Broker was riding on a huge wolf. He was tall and big even among the earth spirits. There was a row of fangs hanging on his chest, and there was a small nail-sized gemstone at the end of each fang. The gemstone was glowing even in the dark night. Whoosh! An arrow that came out of nowhere instantly crossed the distance and nailed a person's head to a tree. Bang! The tree trunk exploded. At this moment, the sound of air exploding could be heard from afar. Enemy! Come out! The broker jumped up from the huge wolf. Deity fist. The broker's chest suddenly collapsed, and his arms seemed to have grown by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times and expanded abruptly. His aura rose sharply as well. One could imagine the power of this punch. However, an arrow suddenly appeared in the dark and shot the broker's head. 6 figures dashed into the darkness. As for the earth spirit whose head had exploded first, its broken head recovered after a short while. At this point, the fight had begun in the forest. The Empress shot the broker with 1 arrow and shot 2 more. Then she put the bow on her back, moved her feet and glided into the darkness. Here! An angry roar came from the darkness in front of her. She waved her claws and tore the air apart. However, the Empress only punched and dispersed all the air in front of her. Then she somersaulted in the air, flew over the head of the other party, and kicked with her right foot, smashing the head of the other party. I'm too strong. The Empress shook her head. The best way to deal with these high-level earth spirits wasn't to kill them. They could be resurrected countless times until their symbiotic partner used up all their vitality and died. The best way to deal with them was to knock them out. The Empress kicked again and turned the wriggling corpse into a rain of blood. Then she rushed toward the other earth spirits who heard the commotion. You're just a monster with strength but no ability. The Empress twisted her body a few times in midair and dodged the pincer attack of the 2 men. She smashed one of their heads with her palm and kicked their corpses to pieces. Prolonging their recovery time could also increase the consumption of energy for their resurrection. Then he fought at close range and broke the arms of the other earth spirit. Then he went to his back and punched him lightly. Another light punch, another light punch, another light punch, and another light punch. The 3rd punch finally knocked him out. All of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. From kicking the other person to knocking the other person unconscious, only 2 breaths of time had passed. After throwing him to the ground, the Empress faced the other 3. First, she smashed one of them into pieces, following which she knocked the other 2 unconscious. It was just enough for her to go back and knock out the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th person. In less than 2 minutes, the 6 people who had entered the forest had stopped breathing. The faces of the 6 earth spirits outside turned pale. It's that woman. Broker already knew who his opponent was. Among the human race, only that woman was not to be trifled with. Even the virtuous king had suffered a great loss at her hands. The question now was whether to enter or retreat. There was almost no need to think about it. Black sky god above, there is no retreat. 15 minutes later, the Empress was sitting on a tree with 12 unconscious earth spirits lying on the ground. Hello. The Empress connected to the radio station. Wake the prince up. After a while, Rinpoche appeared on the other side of the radio station and asked, Your Majesty? I'm fighting for my life outside, yet you are sleeping so soundly. The Empress raised her eyebrows when she heard Rinpoche's voice. Do you want me to fight for my life? Rinpoche chuckled. The Empress immediately lost her temper and said, Forget it. I still have to collect your corpse. Your Majesty, it's so late. Did something happen? Did you meet those earth spirits who came out? 12 of them. They were all knocked out. Your Majesty, you're amazing. You can easily take down the earth spirits. Rinpoche laughed pretentiously. Cut the crap. Although these earth spirits are powerful, they aren't good at fighting. The most troublesome thing is that they can share lives and resurrect many times. On the battlefield, this is an advantage. However, in a fight between experts, it's the biggest weakness. Although you said so, only your Majesty can do it, Rinpoche said. After all, the Empress's longevity heaven was superior to these earth spirits in terms of level. Otherwise, she might not have been able to take them down so easily. The Empress shook her head gently. This wasn't a good thing but rather a sad thing. If the human race could have more experts, it wouldn't have been so troublesome. If the human race hadn't been occupied for thousands of years, they wouldn't have been reduced to this state. 12 living, advanced individuals who can share lives with each other. We must bring them back. Where is your Majesty's exact location? Rinpoche knew what the current urgent matter was after hearing a few words from the Empress. The Empress reported the location to Rinpoche. Fortunately, when exploring the 60,000 mountains back then, the map that was made had markings similar to latitude and longitude lines. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult to find an ordinary location in this vast mountain range. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble your majesty to send these earth spirits to the coordinates 164/337. This is the limit of our helicopter, Rinpoche said after some calculations. This extreme distance, including the extra fuel they brought with them, allowed them to clear most of the cabin when they arrived. 12 earth spirits could fit into the cabin. The Empress looked at the map. This location wasn't far from her, but it didn't feel good to be ordered around like this. After thinking about it, the Empress suppressed her resentment and decided to teach that guy a lesson when she got back. She found some tree vines to tie the 12 earth spirits into a ball and gave each of them a few kicks on the head to ensure that they wouldn't wake up halfway. Then she held a big ball and jumped into the air. After getting her bearings, she headed toward a certain point in the north. At dawn, the Empress stopped at a mountain peak, kicked each of the earth spirits in the head, and waited for the helicopter. She waited from morning to night. Just as the Empress was about to lose her temper, the helicopter finally arrived. Your Majesty. A few aboriginals jumped down from the helicopter and greeted the Empress. I'll leave these guys to you. The Empress pointed to the earth spirit balls that were tied together. Yes. An aboriginal lady took a needle that was as thick as a child's finger and inserted it into the abdomen of an earth spirit. She then forced the liquid in the syringe into his body. This was a strong anesthetic that was made from concentrated castor bean sap mixed with other things. She gave them the highest dose of the drug, which was enough to kill other creatures dozens of times. However, these earth spirits were afraid of everything except death. The Empress looked at them and stepped on a rock at the side, leaving a footprint that was 1 inch deep. That's about the strength. It's just enough to knock them out. If they come back to life halfway, chop off their heads and wait for them to grow back. The Empress knew that these earth spirits would be very useful, so she patiently told the others how to deal with them. Go back and tell the prince to wash his neck and wait for me. The aboriginals were speechless. Didn't he really want to wash his neck and wait for the Empress? The prince was done for. Yes. Chapter 12:12. This is an earth spirit. Rinpoche looked at the tightly bound earth spirit in front of him and carefully sized it up. With so much hair, it should be living in a relatively cold area, at least a temperate zone. There are spring, summer, autumn, and winter seasons, and the summer temperature isn't high. It's about 1.7 meters tall, has a flat and short forehead, and doesn't seem to have a big brain. Rinpoche took a knife from the guard's waist, cut off the top of the earth spirit's head, took a look and dug out its brain to confirm his guess. The area of the cerebral cortex folds was much smaller than that of humans. He then carefully observed this earth spirit to grow a new brain. Rinpoche was curious. If a brain could grow, how could memory be achieved? Unless they had a data platform like a mainframe that backed up everyone's memory at any time. Rinpoche immediately thought of the black sky god. The limbs are short, strong, and slightly curved. The calves and forearms are proportionally small, and the hands and fingers are also short. They haven't evolved to use tools for a long time. It looks like they haven't evolved for a long time and haven't fully evolved. Rinpoche pondered for a while. It was really surprising that they could develop a more developed civilization and perfect language. In addition, the earth spirit's ability to share vitality with other creatures pointed to the black sky god. The guard at the side looked at Rinpoche studying these monsters and said something he didn't understand. After racking his brains for a long time, he could only say, "Damn awesome. Your Highness, you seem to be very knowledgeable about these things. I've long known that you're an extraordinary person who seems to know everything. It seems like it's true after seeing you today." Suyu, who had rushed over, smiled and complimented. Several guards immediately looked at him fiercely. You have already said everything. What are we supposed to say? Rinpoche waved his hand and didn't say much. In order to prevent himself from losing the ability to travel, he engraved countless stone tablets and recorded countless books on the planet in his sea of knowledge. He had read and studied a lot over the years. He might not be able to do scientific experiments. However, he knew a little bit about each side, and he knew quite a lot. In this regard, he was considered an all-rounder even if he returned to Earth. Someone send them back to the capital and hand them over to the laboratory. He had to be careful on the road. The anesthetic had to be strong. If he showed signs of waking up, he had to cut off his head first. As for their control, everything must be done according to the strictest standards, and there must be no slack in the slightest, Rinpoche instructed. Yes. Rinpoche ordered his men to carry the earth spirit away and clean up the room. After that, he would instruct the laboratory. He had some ideas regarding the research of these earth spirits. Most importantly, there was the secret of sharing life with the Black Sky God. Next, there was the secret of the longevity celestial plane. After all, there were only a few longevity heavens in the entire human race. It would not be good to study them. Finally, there was the weakness of the earth spirits. Fortunately, even though there weren't many earth spirits, they were strong enough to resist. They wouldn't die easily. Moreover, a group of earth spirits were about to set off. After arranging everything, Lu Jun and Suyu went to the yard. Suyu had lost a lot of weight. His qi and blood were full and his eyes were full of spirit. He was completely different from before. If he were to be thrown back to Great Xia now, the people of Great Xia would probably not be able to recognize him. Not bad these days, Rinpoche praised. Your Highness flatters me, I don't deserve it. Suyu waved his hands. He really didn't deserve it. He took medicinal baths every day, drank a bunch of medicine and used crystals. A bunch of people spent a lot of resources to push him to the earth wheel level. How could he dare to face Rinpoche? I didn't expect that I, old Su, would become an earth wheel expert one day. Suyu patted his stomach. Although it had decreased a lot, there was still some left. Maybe there will be a day when I become a spirit wheel expert. Rinpoche laughed. That is also thanks to you, Your Highness. You are a talent, and talents are different from ordinary people. There are always special people in this world, and special people get special treatment. Rinpoche waved his hand. I don't deserve it. Do what you have to do well, and you won't be ashamed. Did you see those monsters just now? They are the enemies of the human race, but they are not the main enemy. The main enemy is still behind. The myriad races, the myriad races. Rinpoche sighed. The myriad races. Just this name alone was like a huge mountain that was hanging over the heads of the human race. For so many years, he had always been worried that this mountain would fall one day and turn the human race into ashes. Your Highness, what you are doing is a matter of life and death for the human race. I will do my best. Suyu quickly said. So, you can be of some use now, Rinpoche said. Get ready. Follow me to the front line in a few days. Suyu's face suddenly trembled. His entire face was trembling along with the flesh inside. I will write a will. If anything happens to me, I hope that Your Highness will consider my contributions to the human race. Rinpoche wanted to kick him out. How did you survive under Su Qing's hands for so long? Eating, sleeping, and talking nonsense, and I became a marquis. Suyu thought but didn't dare to say it out loud. Although he didn't say it out loud, Rinpoche could see it. He couldn't help but sigh. This person and that person wanted to rob others along the way, but in the end they became emperors. However, that person was really capable. Of course, Suyu was also capable. You won't die. Don't look like that. Rinpoche really didn't like to see his timid appearance. Yes, yes. 2 days later, Rinpoche, Shiwanya, and the others were waiting at the Inchuan airport. When they saw the plane land, they quickly went to greet it. Your Majesty. Everyone greeted. Rinpoche looked directly at the Empress. This time she had been out for a long time. She looked fine, but her clothes were dirty and stained with blood and filth, making her look dirty. His face, on the other hand, was full of heroic spirit, and his eyes were even brighter, sparkling with brilliance as he looked around. Thank you for your hard work, Your Majesty, Rinpoche said in a low voice. You talk too much. I want to take a bath. Quickly arrange it. The Empress said impatiently. Do you want me to accompany you in the bath? The Empress thought for a while before she understood what he meant. She was furious and said, I'll deal with you when I get back. Seeing that the Empress was about to leave, Rinpoche looked in the direction of the plane and saw a group of people getting off it. These were the people who were originally stationed in Aching Valley. Now, all the people had been evacuated and set up a trap for the earth spirits to step into. A week later, a group of earth spirits rushed into Aching Valley and only saw a huge abandoned camp. Damn it, those humans ran away again. This place is very big and seems to have stored a lot of resources. It must be very important to those humans. However, they have no choice but to give up this place when facing our army. Check carefully and don't let anything go. Dozens of yellow-skinned mice, which were half the size of a human, were released and smelled everywhere in the camp. Soon, dozens of explosions were heard. An earth spirit sneered, Humph, we have seen through the tricks of the humans. Next, we just have to find them and kill them. These days, the humans only dared to harass them with those explosive traps. On the one hand, it made them angry and frustrated. On the other hand, it made them believe that the humans were weak and could only use this method to delay them. Aching Valley was a place that they had to pass through. There were cliffs on both sides. After checking, the Earth Spirit Army advanced toward this place. The scouts who spread out to search found a collapsed cave about 5 kilometers away from Aching Valley. A yellow-skinned mouse sniffed outside the cave and immediately cried out, "Dig it and see what they are hiding." When they dug out the entire cave, they found another collapsed tunnel. Fortunately, the Earth Spirits were good at controlling wild beasts and naturally had creatures that were good at digging tunnels. They dug along this tunnel for a few kilometers before a cave appeared in front of them. "We have dug through. Is this direction toward the human camp? Quickly check it out." When they had followed the tunnel for almost 5 kilometers, several forks suddenly appeared in front of them. On both sides of each fork were many man-made caves. They were so densely packed that they looked like ant nests. As they went further in, they saw many sealed iron buckets in the caves that looked like honeycombs. There were hundreds of them in this fork. There was a sign in front of them. On it was written in the language of the Stainless City, "Safe." Below the 2 words was a skull. "Oh no, go and inform the virtuous king. Tell the army to stop." As soon as they finished speaking, boom. Their consciousness only lingered for a second before it disappeared. First, set a small target. For example, 1 second. Chapter 12-13. Aching Valley was about 1 kilometer wide and 3 kilometers long. A large army was gradually entering and passing through the valley. One could see that there were tigers, leopards, wolves, elephants, eagles, gigantic beasts of disaster, and even winged snakes in this army. Even though they were thousands of kilometers away, it was clear from the video that this army wasn't to be trifled with. When the army entered 1/3 of the way and began to leave the valley, the video suddenly shook and the entire scene was turned upside down. Flames shot out from the ground. This army of various beasts immediately became chaotic. In the face of such a disaster, the beasts completely lost control. In order to escape, the huge saber-toothed tiger slapped the giant snake in front of it away and smashed half of the Earth Spirit's body. After the giant snake fell to the ground, it turned around and bit a huge wolf that crashed into it. The 2 of them fought. However, it didn't take long for both sides to be engulfed by the flames that spewed out from the ground. Ordinary Earth Spirits didn't have the ability to share life. Only Longevity Heaven Earth Spirits could do so. Nearly 10,000 Earth Spirits were turned into ashes in this disaster. There are 30,000 Earth Spirits. Excluding the 1,000 who stayed at the border between the 2 worlds, the 2,000 who died after being taken away by the Sage King, and the 2,000 who were harassed along the way, there are only about 24,000 left. After the incident at Aching Valley, there are only about 15,000 survivors left, the Empress said as she looked at the images on the screen. Not bad. There are 30,000 Earth Spirits with their mounts. They are still powerful but much easier to deal with. Ren Baqin laughed. The leader of the Earth Spirit is an impulsive and irritable guy who is indecisive after setbacks. I wonder if he will retreat. No, he won't. He brought a large army here and then retreated without even seeing them. How could he do that? Even if the foreign races are different from us and don't care about their reputation, he at least has to see us. Not to mention, from his previous performance, he isn't someone who doesn't care about his reputation. Ren Baqin laughed. Next is Jianghu Stream? The Empress got up and looked at the map. Ren Baqin nodded and said, "That's right, it's Jianghu Ravine. It will take them another half a month to reach there. After this incident, they will be even more anxious and careful. Those who were sent to harass them will continue to be anxious, but they have to be extra careful. Even though those brats aren't afraid of death, they aren't stupid," Shiwanya said. The ancients said, "Heaven is in harmony, earth is in harmony, and man is in harmony." These long-haired monsters came from a cold place and were not used to the heat and humidity here, so they lost the harmony of the weather. In this mountain range they were not familiar with the terrain, and they did not have a map. The scouting range of the outpost was limited, and they had lost the terrain. "We have the heavens and the earth and we have deployed our army. Once we open up our pockets we will definitely be able to capture them all in one fell swoop." Suyu was finally acting like a strategist. After saying this, Suyu inwardly nodded. He had to display his skills and leave a good impression on His Majesty. The better he performed, the more secure his life would be. He feared the Empress from the bottom of his heart. In the past few years, countless envoys from various countries had died in the hands of the Empress for no reason. In everyone's eyes, the Empress was a bloodthirsty person with unpredictable moods. Even though he was somewhat useful, he was afraid that the Empress would suddenly find him an eyesore and behead him. Even if that person regretted it in the future, he would still lose his life. At the thought of this, he couldn't help but look at Rinpoche with admiration. People say that being in the king's company is like being with a tiger. This person married a tiger and was still safe and sound. He is really a role model for our generation. We can't capture them all in one fell swoop. If we do, Stainless City will send people. Let them run back. As long as the Sage King feels that he can win, he will go back and proclaim that the human race is strong, but he will not rely on other races. Instead, he will lead the army to avenge his humiliation. This way we can have a few more years. Rinpoche laughed. Your Highness is a strategist and understands people's hearts. I am ashamed of my inferiority, Suyu hurriedly said. Stop flattering me. I know my own capabilities. Rinpoche waved his hand. He knew that he wasn't a genius, and military knowledge wasn't limited to reading 300 military books. The Empress studied the map for a long time before saying, "It will take 5 days to reach Jianghu Stream at full speed. Let's set off in 5 days. By the way, how's the route you mentioned? We have already established a stronghold here." Rinpoche pointed to a location on the east side of the map. Next, we need to explore and establish strongholds along the way. If everything goes well, we can reach here in 1.5 years. Rinpoche was pointing at the Wall of the Two Worlds. As long as this route is established, it will only take 3 to 4 months to travel from Wangjing to the Wall of the Two Worlds. There's no need to stay in the Qin nation then, the Empress said faintly. If we set off from Yidu, the capital of the Qin nation, we can reduce the time. The Empress's calm and natural tone made Suyu shiver involuntarily. Shiwanya smacked his lips. The entire protectorate of the southeast was about to cheer. In the past few years they had attacked Great Xia from the north, destroyed the Yun nation from the northeast, and leveled Tianjing Basin from the protectorate of the south. Although the protectorate of the center didn't have many outstanding achievements, they had gained a lot of military merits from the war with Great Xia. Only the protectorate of the southeast hadn't made any moves for so many years. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just borrow a city. Rinpoche laughed. Rinpoche immediately thought of a concession and a free port. He could use this free port to transport a large number of products to the Qin nation. Could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Will they be so well behaved? Shiwanya laughed. Your Majesty, you alone can level Yidu. They will be well behaved. Rinpoche laughed. After this war was over, they could just make a trip to the Qin nation. In addition, this is where my brother-in-law went missing. Rinpoche pointed to a spot on the map. The Empress took a deep look at it. Qi Ziding had gone missing there, and it was very likely that the former emperor had disappeared there as well. However, all the detectors that reached the other side of the door were never heard from again. It could be a one-way door, or there could be a huge danger on the other side of the door. Your Majesty can't take any risks before we pacify the various races. I know, the Empress responded. 5 days later, the Empress, Rinpoche, and the rest set off. First, 12 helicopters took them and their mounts to a mountain peak 3,000 kilometers away. It took them another 5 days to reach Jianghu Stream. In fact, Jianghu Stream was located halfway up the Yiqiao mountain range. Its full name should be Jianghu Stream. Jianghu Stream was less than 300 meters wide. There were cliffs on both sides and the mountain path on the other side had been destroyed. Even the mounts of the Earth Spirit race, with the exception of a few flying mounts, couldn't climb up. However, there was a mountain path on their side. There were still 10 days before the arrival of the Earth Spirit race. Chapter 12-14. Jianghu Stream was 10 kilometers long, and there was a big city in the direction of the Aboriginals. It looked very big, and even though it could only accommodate 20,000 soldiers, it was prepared beforehand. On the surface, this was a human fortress and an important pass, but in reality it wasn't. In order to confuse the Earth Spirit, a lot of manpower was spent to build a big city that could accommodate more than 200,000 people. This was called Guangbai City. In the middle of the city was a pass. In the south, there was a concrete wall that was 20 meters tall and 8 meters thick that had just been built. Behind the wall was a military camp with thousands of soldiers. When he arrived at the small city behind Jianghu Stream, Rinpoche received a piece of news. They had found a weakness of the Earth Spirit. Aphrodisiac. The Earth Spirit had strong desires, but their hearts couldn't handle it. Due to their limited brain capacity, their self-control wasn't strong either. A large amount of aphrodisiac could not only overwhelm their hearts, but it could also make them lose their minds. For example, the sap of a tree called sandpole was a strong aphrodisiac. As long as this sap was sprayed on them, they would fall into a state of confusion. When Rinpoche heard this news, he thought about it for 4 hours and finally gave up on this killer weapon. It was still the same reason. After staying in Guangbai City for a day, Rinpoche headed for the pass in front. It was 20 meters tall and 8 meters thick. This pass was considered majestic, but it was like a piece of paper in front of the Earth Spirit Army. In front of the calamity beasts, this kind of wall was like a foot. Rinpoche could almost see the scene. Your Majesty, Your Highness. Many of the generals and soldiers were very respectful when they saw them, even if Rinpoche sent them to their deaths. The Empress looked at both sides and asked, "Why don't we bury explosives on the cliffs on both sides? Dig from a distance like last time?" The Empress couldn't help but ask as she looked at both sides. Rinpoche was silent for a while and said softly, "On the surface, the cliffs on both sides are as hard as steel and difficult to dig. In fact, we did this to let them know that we are weak and that we relied on some tricks to achieve this. As long as they are careful, we can win next time." The Empress stopped in her tracks. She looked around and didn't say anything. She had agreed to this strategy before, but looking at the people around her, she was still in a bad mood. The two of them stayed here for a day, watching as they reinforced the city walls, planted explosives inside and outside the pass, and watched as they busied themselves in full swing. That night, the two returned to Guangbai City. The next day he saw Li Yuanzhu and Lin Yu. "Let's see if there's anything we can do to help," she said without waiting for him to speak. In fact, Rinpoche already knew about their arrival. Otherwise they wouldn't have come here. This woman, who had once been a heaven's chosen along with the female empress, had long fallen behind. Even with the supply of many origin crystals, she had only reached the initial stage of opening the heaven and earth domain. If she hadn't stayed in Great Xia and gone to the other side of the wall of the two worlds, even if she wasn't as good as the Empress, she wouldn't be far behind. However, she didn't seem to mind and continued to endure. Rinpoche had a very good impression of her. It wasn't romantic love. It was a kind of admiration. Others who shed their blood for the human race were worthy of admiration, but she was willing to stay at the rear for the sake of the human race. From the third most powerful expert in the world to the current top 100, she was also worthy of admiration. In addition, Lin Yu had also arrived at the heaven and earth domain. It seemed like her reaction was much faster. 3 seconds later, she smiled gently and said, "So it's your highness. Long time no see. Greetings." "Greetings to both of you." Rinpoche smiled. "First of all, thank you for coming to help." A moment later, Li Yuanzhu saw the Empress. Li Yuanzhu took a few deep looks at the Empress and couldn't see through her. No one knew if there were any fluctuations in her heart, but her gaze and expression were as calm as ever. However, Lin Yu was online all year round. Upon seeing the Empress, she took a few seconds to respond, "Greetings to the Empress of Dayo." At this time, Li Yuanzhu said, "Greetings to the Empress of Dayo. Thank you for the trouble." The Empress looked gentle, then looked at Lin Yu and said, "Lin Yu, you look much better." Lin Yu was speechless. 10 seconds later, Lin Yu said, "My mind is much clearer." "That's a good thing." Lin Yu hesitated for another 10 seconds before revealing a mysterious smile. Rinpoche looked at her for a long time and felt that the signal here was poor again. "I wonder where the foreign races are now?" Li Yuanzhu asked. "They will arrive in 3 days. I wonder how strong they are. We will definitely win this battle." Li Yuanzhu was relieved. "I'm here to see the foreign races. I won't refuse if there's anything I can do for you." After a while, Li Yuanzhu began to inquire about the whereabouts of the other people, and Rinpoche told her about them one by one. Those people were divided into 2 groups. One group was seizing the time to train outside the wall of 2 worlds, while the other group was behind the Earth Spirit race. After the battle with the Earth Spirit race, these people would come out from the back and cause trouble for the Earth Spirit race. After that, they would fight against the foreign experts together with the Empress. Seeing that everything was in order, Li Yuanzhu was quite happy. 3 days later, Rinpoche, the Empress, Shiwanya, Li Yuanzhu, and the others stood on the mountain pass and looked into the distant sky. They could see a few large birds cruising in the sky. "They are here." It wasn't known who said this, but everyone looked solemn. "You can go back now. You are in the way here," the Empress said without looking back. The others knew who she was talking about. The dignified Prince of Dayo had become a hindrance here. One had to know that Rinpoche's prestige in Dayo's imperial court had been increasing over the past 2 years, and his reputation among the people had also increased. However, in front of the Empress he was still a weakling. Li Yuanzhu couldn't help but smile. "Thank you for your hard work in this battle. Don't get entangled. As long as you achieve your goal, come back." Rinpoche cupped his hands at them, turned to look at the surrounding soldiers and said, "The imperial court will take care of your parents, wives and children. Thank you, Your Highness." Thousands of soldiers responded with a steel-like voice that carried a murderous aura. "We understand. Please go back, Your Highness." Li Yuanzhu nodded in response. Before coming here, Rinpoche had already warned her, and she knew the meaning of this battle. Rinpoche looked into the distance again, got off the city wall without looking back, and rode the Crow General back to Guangbi City. As time passed, a line appeared in the distance, and it looked like a flood was surging in this direction. "Prepare to meet the enemy. Defend the nation with your body." The soldiers shouted and drew their swords. Even the mountain-like giant beast in front of them, which was squeezed into the Pintu stream and moving toward them, couldn't make them waver. The enemy didn't stop at all, and 2,000 vanguards flooded toward the mountain pass. The first to explode were the cliffs on both sides. The iron content of the mountain walls here was extremely high, so the explosives weren't buried deep. Although a lot of rubble was blown off, not many enemies were killed. Kill. The earth spirit in front bared his fangs and urged the beast he was riding on to pounce. Shoot. Chapter 12:15. Shoot horizontally. Although everyone was puzzled, they still followed the Empress's instructions. The bows that were originally aimed at the sky turned to the front. Facing the oncoming army, the Empress stood on top of the wall and took a deep breath like a dragon sucking in water. The air in the entire Jianghu stream surged, and a gale surged into the stream from above before sweeping toward the Empress. "Shoot!" Shi Huanya immediately ordered when he saw the Empress make a gesture. Buzz. Thousands of bows shot out at the same time, and the air vibrated. Ha! The Empress opened her mouth and exhaled. Suddenly, a gale filled the sky and boosted the speed of the arrows. The thousands of arrows were more than twice as fast in the wind. Pft! The sound of arrows piercing through flesh rang out incessantly. Li Yuanzhu looked at the Empress, who was not far away, and was shocked. This inhale and exhale could be said to have changed the weather. Even so, there were still very few earth spirits who fell. Roar! How! All kinds of beasts roared incessantly, and figures pounced toward the top of the city wall. Get lost! The Empress waved her sleeves and swept a large number of earth spirits down. Most of them vomited blood in the air and their bones were broken. An inconspicuous wooden sword appeared in Li Yuanzhu's hand. She leaped into the midst of the enemy, and with a wave of her hand, the earth spirits and their mounts were sent flying. Li Yuanzhu stabbed the sword into the ground, and the earth spirits within a 100-meter radius felt their bodies sink as if they had fallen into a quagmire. Li Yuanzhu waved her sleeves and swept away the enemies within a 100-meter radius. She moved nimbly like a swimming fish, and none of the earth spirits within a 100-meter radius could get close to her. She stood there like a reef in a torrent, forcing the torrent to part on both sides. A low flute sounded, sometimes desolate and sometimes heroic. The earth spirits under the wall held their heads and screamed. Their skin turned red and soon their heads exploded. Retreat! A roar came from the vanguard of the earth spirit race, and a figure pounced toward Li Yuanzhu, who had become a reef in the torrent. Bang! She took a step back, but her opponent followed up with another punch. Li Yuanzhu's beautiful eyes flickered. She already knew the actual situation of these earth spirits, so she didn't fight him head-on. She twisted her body and went to his side. Her left hand pressed him down, and the back of her right hand slapped his waist 3 times in a flash. Boom! The figure smashed into the sea of people, leaving a trail of blood. As expected, although his strength and speed are enough, his combat skills are shallow, and his combat ability is not high. He's like a child holding a sharp weapon, Li Yuanzhu thought to herself. If it had been someone else, their internal organs would have been crushed after being whipped 3 times. However, the figure somersaulted on the ground and leaped dozens of meters in a single leap. However, it was even worse than the last time. She grabbed his leg and threw him into the distance. Ah! The figure roared in anger and crawled up again. Very quickly he was sent flying for the 3rd time. However, this kind of injury was almost non-existent to the high-level earth spirits who had reached the longevity heaven. Li Yuanzhu acted as a reef in the torrent and greatly slowed down the speed of the earth spirit's vanguard. The Empress waved her sleeves at the top of the city wall and swept the earth spirits off their feet. Lin Yu pressed her flute against her red lips and played an unknown song. The heads of the people at the foot of the city wall exploded one after another. It was like setting off firecrackers. Red and white heads flew everywhere. With the help of the other aboriginal soldiers, Even if they were four-way heaven-level soldiers, the weakest among the earth spirits was at the Kismet heaven level, and the captain was at the cardinal heaven level. However, with so many arrows, some of them could be killed. After all, the earth spirits in the longevity heaven realm didn't have the ability to share life and not fear death. In less than 30 minutes, the earth spirits at the foot of this mountain pass had a huge bump on their heads. Nearly half of the 2,000 vanguard soldiers were killed. At this moment, a shocking roar was heard from afar. The mountain-like calamity beast roared angrily at the sky and charged in their direction. "You have a bad memory." The Empress snorted and went to meet it. However, dozens of figures rushed out of the enemy's formation like lightning. Li Yuanzhu turned to look at the earth spirits, who had begun to rush up the city wall after the Empress left, and sighed softly. She looked up at the figures rushing over, pulled her wooden sword out of the ground, and turned into a blue shadow as she went to meet them. Lin Yu's flute stopped abruptly. She looked to her left and right and said, "Take care." "Thank you." A burly man who looked like a general laughed. "Boys, fight to the death. Fight to the death." Many aboriginals on the city wall roared with weapons in their hands. When Lin Yu went to support Li Yuanzhu, a sea of blood immediately appeared on the city wall. The general who had laughed earlier waved his saber to block the sharp claws of the saber-toothed tiger, causing it to fall off the wall. However, a wolf jumped up from the side and bit off the head of an aboriginal. The person beside him cut the stomach of the wolf in half with his saber and was beheaded by the mount on his back. Not far away, 3 aboriginals were entangled by a giant snake. All their bones were broken, and they used the last of their strength to slash the head of the snake with their sabers. However, they only managed to break off a scale. The general roared, chopping the knight on the giant wolf's back in half with a backhand strike, and then slicing off the giant wolf's head. However, his body suddenly stopped, a barbed tail sticking out from his chest. The general grinned, and blood seeped out from the gaps between his teeth. He felt that the tail was about to fling him away, so he immediately grabbed the end of the tail protruding from his chest and slashed it down. The beast behind him roared, and the general fell from the top of the city wall with a big hole in his chest. The moment he fell, he threw his saber out and nailed the earth spirit on the back of the lizard-like beast to the wall. The aboriginals were 1 level higher than the soldiers of Great Xia and the Yun Nation, and their average strength was at the four-way heaven realm. The earth spirits were 1 level higher than the aboriginals, and their average strength was at the Kismet heaven realm. The aboriginals had to pay 10 times the casualties in exchange for the life of an earth spirit. Needless to say, the beasts were fiercer, sharper, and more powerful than the earth spirits. Battle cries and roars resounded from the top of the city wall, but they were gradually replaced by the roars of the beasts. Broken limbs and blood were everywhere. The 3,000 aboriginals became corpses under the attack of the earth spirit vanguard in less than 30 minutes. Of the 1,000 vanguard, 800 were left. Including the mounts, there were 1,700 of them. 200 of the earth spirit vanguard died, but only 100 of the mounts died. The Empress smashed the upper body of the Sage King with a punch. She turned around, caught the arm with her left hand and kicked out. Except for the arm, the Sage King's entire body exploded. Feeling the wind behind her, the Empress didn't stop. She appeared in the air and slapped down with her right hand. It was as if an invisible palm had slapped down from the sky. The few earth spirit experts who jumped up with the Empress were all slapped down. The Empress took the opportunity to look at the pass, only to see a sea of blood and the beasts eating. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the earth spirit experts below with a murderous look in her eyes. However, more than a dozen experts leaped into the air and threw punches and kicks at the Empress. All of a sudden, the Empress was completely surrounded. However, as the Empress's body spun like a spinning top, she punched out in all directions. After a series of explosions and crashing sounds, her punches flew toward the earth spirits who had fallen in all directions. However, just as she repelled the earth spirits, a huge black eagle swooped down from the sky. She turned around and repelled it, but another wave of flames came at her. Behind the flames were 7 or 8 earth spirit experts. The Empress knew that if she continued to waste time here, she would be killed by them sooner or later. Although the earth spirits weren't strong, there were too many of them and they wouldn't die easily. Her figure flashed a few times in the air and appeared beside Li Yuanzhu. The third most powerful expert in the world was missing half a sleeve, there was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth, and she couldn't move half of her shoulder. Only her eyes were as calm as before. "Let's go." The Empress repelled the surrounding earth spirits, threw Li Yuanzhu out, and threw Lin Yu out of the battle circle before leaving. When she passed the pass, she rushed to the top of the city wall to vent her anger, sending a rain of corpses flying. Chapter 12:16. Don't chase them. Seeing that the other earth spirits were about to chase, the Sage King stopped them. He had suffered a lot when he chased after the woman in red. Now he understood the meaning of don't chase a cornered enemy. The Sage King was quite satisfied with this battle. He didn't kill thousands of humans, but he finally met them instead of being led by the nose. The ground shook when the giant disaster beasts walked. In a short while they arrived at the pass. The Sage King looked at the blood flowing down from above with a satisfied expression. These humans are so weak. Except for a few strong ones, the rest are like ants. They can't even withstand a single blow. The Sage King laughed. The others also agreed. In fact, even though everyone's attention was on the Empress during the battle just now, they had also been paying attention to the situation here after the battle. These humans looked brave, but they couldn't even withstand a single blow. These humans were extremely weak, not much different from the stronger ones among the lower races. In fact, they weren't even as strong as the top lower races. Back then the humans were also very weak. But the upper limit of their strong ones was very high. Plus, they reproduced so quickly that they became a medium race, an earth spirit said. That takes time. Only a few strong ones can emerge from a large number of humans. After being exiled for so many years, the humans have already declined. They don't have time to develop again. Sage King, there's a big human city after this valley. It looks like it can accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. Let's see where you can run this time. The Sage King laughed. They finally found them. Should we go after them? No hurry. They can't run away, the Sage King said. How far are we from the human city? A moment later there was news, only a dozen miles, 7 or 8 kilometers. They could reach it in a snap of their fingers. How many satiety pills do we have? 3 for each of us. The fullness pill was a special kind of food that the Earth Spirit clan used when they were traveling. Along the way the Earth Spirit clan's army couldn't even find a mouse within 100 miles. They had all been turned into rations, and with the fullness pill, they had managed to survive until now. Everyone take one and rest here. We'll start the battle in 2 hours. The Sage King thought for a while. Let the scouts continue forward to investigate. The terrain here is narrow. Those humans must have set up traps. Every Earth Spirit had a deep memory of the human clan's explosive traps. Contrary to the human clan's weak strength, these explosive traps were a headache for the Earth Spirits. He immediately sent out the scouts. They've stopped. There were cameras everywhere in the Pintu stream. The humans could see everything that happened to the Earth Spirit clan. Rinpoche looked at the screen. The Earth Spirit was resting outside the pass, and many ferocious beasts ran up to the pass to feed on the corpses. He could feel the Empress beside him tensing up and unable to restrain her anger. Don't worry, they will pay the price soon. Rinpoche grabbed the Empress's hand, but he didn't expect her to break free. After all, this strategy was proposed by Rinpoche. Rinpoche didn't mind. After all, he felt uncomfortable. However, it was precisely these corpses that covered up the traces and smell of the buried explosives. The explosives and iron fragments that could cause great damage were buried under the pass and behind it. On the contrary, there were no explosives in front of Guangbi City. If the cliffs on both sides collapsed, the 20,000 soldiers in Guangbi City would be buried with them. Rinpoche looked at the scene in front of him, especially the 3 giant beasts. They were more than 100 meters tall and 30 meters wide. They were terrifying. Can we think of a way to keep these beasts here? Rinpoche asked. The Earth Spirit clan only had a small victory and would soon be defeated. Rinpoche was thinking about the spoils of war. He was also very interested in these giant beasts. It was hard to imagine that a terrestrial creature could be so huge. Giant elephants that were more than 10 to 20 meters tall were already terrifying to him. These giant beasts were really like mountains. The Empress crossed her arms and said, "The aura of this thing is probably at the intermediate level of longevity heaven, but its strength and vitality are far superior to ordinary creatures. It will be very difficult to keep it intact." "As long as it is alive," Rinpoche said. "At least it can be used for research." Then cut off its limbs. It sounded simple, but the Empress was the only one who could do it. Rinpoche looked for a moment, picked up the walkie-talkie and asked, "Have you arrived?" "Just outside Jianghu stream." "Good. When the explosion sounds, you will charge in from the back and entangle their experts. Also, be careful of falling objects." After switching off the radio, Rinpoche strode out of the door. In the square inside the city wall, more than 500 160 caliber mortars had been set up densely. Thousands of people were busy working, and many of them were familiar faces such as Tong Lan and other doctoral students as well as some researchers. Mortars weren't complicated. Even a 160 caliber mortar could be used by 2 aboriginals. However, the shells this time were a little different. All the shells were produced by Dayo. They used a type of homemade explosive with the addition of crystal powder. It was named Yuan 1 explosive, and its explosive power was much greater than that of TNT. It was 3 times that of TNT of the same weight. Previously, the Research Institute was conducting research on diversifying the use of crystals, especially in weapons. This kind of explosive was one of the results of the research. The explosive itself wasn't very powerful, but the crystal powder could increase the power of the explosion by 10 times. Although they had conducted many explosive experiments before, this was the first time they were used in actual combat. Dean? Shurgan looked up and wiped his sweat when he saw Rinpochen walking over. Many students still like to call Rinpochen Dean. Are you all ready? I've tested it and there's no problem. Let those monsters see how powerful you are in a while. Rinpochen patted him on the shoulder. Each shell weighed 50 kilograms and had the power of a low-level Cardinal Heaven expert. More importantly, it had fragmentation damage. As long as there were enough shells, even a top-level Cardinal Heaven expert wouldn't be spared. For this battle, 10,000 shells had been prepared. In fact, if Rinpochen wanted to, he could totally make a 300 caliber mortar that was much more powerful than the current one. Even a top-level Cardinal Heaven expert wouldn't be able to withstand 2 shots. However, it was still because of that reason that Rinpochen produced a large number of these small mortars for transitional purposes. Rinpochen was watching everyone check the situation of the mortars when he heard someone shout from behind, "They are moving." Rinpochen raised his head abruptly and said, "Someone send them to the previously arranged hiding place. We want to see the effects of the weapons." Tong Lan shouted. Go back and watch the video. No one knew what would happen in a while. These students were the treasures that he had nurtured for so many years. If they were injured, he would cry to death. In a few steps, he reached the bottom of the city wall. When he reached it, the Empress was already there. An explosion could be heard in the distance. When he knew that there was a large human city ahead, King Xian had already decided to let the giant calamity beasts break through the city. The 2 giant calamity beasts lined up at the front and strode forward. The concrete pass under their feet was like a building block that collapsed in an instant. After them were countless ferocious beasts and the Earth Spirit people. However, the giant calamity beasts passed through safely. When 1/3 of the army behind them passed, there was a sudden loud noise from Jianghu stream. The entire ground was shaking and countless flames shot up from the ground. Countless people were overturned by this violent vibration, and thousands of Earth Spirit people and their mounts were torn apart in an instant. Chapter 12:17. The Sage King on the Disaster Beast heard the explosion and turned his head to look. He saw spray-painted flames everywhere, the cracked ground, and broken limbs flying everywhere. He was instantly enraged. As long as they turned a corner, they would arrive at a human city. But now they had fallen into a human trap. With a quick glance, he knew that there were at least 2,000 or 3,000 casualties. The rest were also stopped by the sudden explosion. There was even a commotion. The Earth Spirit could control the situation, but the beasts still had their instincts. The fact that they hadn't escaped after such an explosion proved that the Earth Spirit had good control. Spread out. Charge forward and crush the humans. The Sage King shouted. Regardless of whether there were other traps along the way, they had to charge forward. Besides, the smell of traps had been covered by the blood and bodies. There was little chance that there would be more traps after that. The Sage King didn't stop after he gave the order. He drove the beast forward and reached the corner in an instant. He could see Guangbi City in front of him. The Sage King immediately saw the woman in red standing on the city wall, as well as the 2 women who had stopped the experts of the Earth Spirit clan. Kill them, the virtuous king roared. The calamity beasts began to charge forward. Are there only women in the human race? The Sage King mocked. From the beginning to the end, the 3 human cultivators he had seen were all women. The Empress raised her eyebrows. Not many people dared to talk to her like that. Even fewer dared to talk to her because she was a woman. She curled her finger and the longbow on her back appeared in her hand. 3 arrows shot out like meteors toward the mountain-like beast of disaster. All 3 arrows hit the same leg and a large piece of flesh was blown up. Ha! The Sage King jumped up and went straight to the top of the city wall. He raised his arms above his head and started to grow bigger and thicker. His arms expanded several times in an instant, revealing the black iron-like muscles under his long hair. Tianxin fist. Then a violent force came crashing down from the sky. It was like an invisible meteorite. The huge pressure was felt even before it reached the ground. The Empress jumped into the air without thinking and punched. Boom. It was almost as powerful as the explosion of a nuclear bomb. Under the punch, the entire Guangbi city was swept up by a strong wind. Even the mortars in the square were a little unstable. The Empress's body suddenly sank, and she fell more than 10 meters before she stomped on the air and rushed up again. However, the Sage King also smashed down with his fist. The Empress furrowed her eyebrows. If it was in the past, it would have been fine to directly avoid it, but at this moment, Guangbi City was right below her. This was the disadvantage of fighting on one's own side. However, this punch of the Sage King was hurried and the power was much weaker. After blocking another punch, the Empress got close to the Sage King. She spun her body in the air and kicked him dozens of times in a row. The Sage King barely managed to block more than a dozen kicks before he was kicked onto the city wall. Following that, he suffered an unknown number of kicks until his upper body was almost unrecognizable as a human. He was heavily slammed onto the mountain wall. The female Empress dashed over in a flash and smashed King Xian into pieces of flesh and blood. Then she stepped on the air and faced the dozen or so experts from the Earth Spirit clan. "Please stop those two beasts of disaster," Ren Baqin said to Li Yuanzhu. "All right." At this moment, Lin Yu didn't have any bad network signal and rushed out of the city with Li Yuanzhu without saying a word. "Prepare the mortars." Ren Baqin looked at the corner of the mountain wall where the Earth Spirit clan's army could be seen and immediately waved his hand. "First team fire." Bang. In an instant, the sound of countless cannons converged into a few sounds. A series of sharp and ear-piercing whistles sounded in the sky. The Earth Spirit clan had just turned the corner when they heard the whistles in the sky. They looked up and saw hundreds of black dots falling from the sky like rain. At first, the Earth Spirit clan didn't pay much attention, but when these black dots landed on the ground and exploded into balls of fire, it directly plowed the area from the corner to 300 meters in the direction of Guangbi City. Only a few hundred of the Earth Spirit clan's army that had rushed over were left, and they rushed toward Guangbi City with ferocious looks on their faces. Ren Baqin frowned. "Second team fire. Fire-breathing team get ready. Throw team get ready to ignite." At Ren Baqin's command, hundreds of people around him carried a long pipe, and the other end of the pipe extended to the oil storage tanks below the city wall. Third team fire. Fourth team fire. The mortars plowed the corner over and over again, and the explosions and flames basically didn't stop. The shrapnel turned the area into a dead zone, and countless Earth Spirit clan members who rushed into that area were blown to pieces. Even a supreme being would find it difficult to resist such a heavy artillery fire in such a narrow space. Even so, a few supreme being Earth Spirits and their mounts still rushed out. The hundreds of Earth Spirits that had rushed over were already 500 meters away from the city. Throw team 300 meters in front, fire. Hundreds of oversized long-handled grenades immediately covered a distance of 300 meters outside the city wall. There was another violent explosion. In order to increase their power, these grenades were more than twice the size of the grenades on Earth. They chose grenades instead of hand grenades because such a large hand grenade was difficult to hold with one's palm. Only grenades were convenient to throw. Ren Baqin stared at the flames and smoke in front of him. When the first figure passed through the smoke, Ren Baqin quickly gave an order. "Fire-breathing team fire. Fire-breathing team first team fire. The other teams are free to fire after loading." He didn't need to observe the Earth Spirit clan in the distance anymore because the experts behind should be rushing over. The Jianghu stream, which was more than 10 kilometers long, was only a 3-minute journey for the Longevity Heaven experts. On the contrary, the people below the city wall were a great threat, even though there were only a few dozen Earth Spirits. Coupled with the Earth Spirits rushing over from behind, the entire battlefield seemed rather sparse. Those who were rushing over were at least Supreme Being Heaven experts. Phew. With the sound of high-pressure oil guns being fired, the area 100 meters in front of the city wall immediately turned into a sea of fire. The Earth Spirit experts, who were already very close to the city wall with endless murderous intent in their eyes, could only see the oncoming flames. Figures stepped on their mounts and leaped toward the top of the city wall. "Get lost. Go down." Shi Wanya immediately waved his long saber, creating a snow-white waterfall. Along with him were the experts recruited by the Protectorate of the South over the past few years. Figures collided in the air with angry shouts and weapons clashing. When the two sides separated, almost all the Earth Spirit experts were smashed into the sea of fire below. Rinpoche observed the situation of the battle. So far, everything had been going smoothly. Mortars, grenades, and flamethrowers were enough to exhaust the enemy to death on this road. These Earth Spirits could only touch the edge of the city wall at most. Looking up into the distance, he saw that the number of mortars raining down on them seemed to have decreased, and the land that had been plowed over and over again was no longer recognizable. At this moment, the sound of explosions decreased a lot, and there seemed to be a large gap in the rain of bullets. Instead, there were sporadic explosions on the mountain wall. Rinpoche focused his eyes, picked up his binoculars and looked into the distance. Only then did he realize that many of the shells were shot by arrows in the air and fell toward the mountain wall. These shells were fused and would only explode when the front end collided with an object. They wouldn't explode if they were shot from the side. Has the Earth Spirit found a way? Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat, but this was also within his expectations. Even the godly archers of Great Xia could shoot grenades onto the city wall, let alone the stronger Earth Spirit. As the explosion suddenly decreased, Rinpoche saw a large group of Earth Spirits rushing in from the rear. Adjust the angle and blanket the area, Rinpoche ordered again. A new round of bombardment began. This time they changed their position and attacked Guangbi City from the corner according to the previous grouping. After a round of bombardment, the number of Earth Spirits that rushed over was reduced by half. However, the other half also rushed out of the area covered by the Vitality. Throw team 300 meters in front, throw. When they finally managed to charge past the Earth Spirits, who had been plowed by the cannonballs, they were greeted by another round of grenades. However, no matter how many Earth Spirits rushed over this time, there were still 500 of them left. Suyu? Rinpoche shouted coldly. With such a big difference in strength, they definitely won't miss. Suyu's face was pale from the earth-shattering battle, and his legs were trembling as he spoke in a trembling voice. Set a small target first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 12:18. Since the beginning of the battle, Suyu had been sweating all over and trembling like a sieve. The fact that he could still stand here was already a testament to his courage. The ferocious Earth Spirit race, the flames everywhere, and the explosions in the distance were completely different from the wars he had participated in. Even though he already knew about it, it still made him feel like he was going to explode when he witnessed it. In Great Xia, the man-will experts were already squad leaders, and the earth-will experts were already experts. The current battlefield was completely different from the current one. The people of Great Xia and most of the Dayo people didn't expect such a war to take place on the other side of the world. This scene had already exceeded the imagination of most people. Looking at another group of foreign races charging up, Suyu quickly shouted, "The difference in strength is so great. They definitely won't miss their target." After he finished speaking, Suyu didn't feel anything. After all, he was also an Earth Wheel expert now, and there weren't many Earth Spirits rushing over. However, those Earth Spirits had bloodthirsty and ferocious looks on their faces. They jumped onto the city wall from 100 meters away, and their mounts fell into the sea of fire. However, the Earth Spirits couldn't care less. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have the chance to jump onto the city wall. The mounts that accompanied them day and night fell into the sea of fire and screamed. This made many Earth Spirit soldiers feel as if their hearts were being cut by knives. Their murderous intent soared to the sky, and they couldn't wait to slaughter all the humans to vent their hatred. While still in the air, they brandished their sabers and slashed down. The sabers cut into human bodies, broke bones, and sprayed blood. These familiar sensations and sounds didn't appear. There was only the uniform sound of the sabers slicing through the air. The bloodthirsty faces froze for a moment. No one knew what exactly happened. They clearly saw people slashing at them, but they missed. It was as if everyone's senses were playing tricks on them. However, before they could figure out what exactly happened, they saw several sabers slashing at them from all directions. Before they could react, they were killed by the sabers. At this time, there were 2,000 ordinary Aboriginal soldiers and 1,000 Kismet Heaven Aboriginal elites on top of the city wall. These elites were similar in strength to the ordinary Earth Spirit soldiers, but their combat skills were much better than those of the Earth Spirit soldiers. They had a high chance of winning even one-on-one, let alone fighting in numbers. After a round of fighting and miserable cries, The first wave of earth spirits who had jumped onto the city wall were hacked to death. When they looked up, they saw dozens of people jumping over. When they saw the situation at the top of the city wall, their pupils immediately shrank, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over their heads. However, they didn't have a choice. Below them were raging flames, and in front of them were thousands of Aboriginal soldiers who were preparing to make dumpling fillings. Most of the Earth Spirit Clan soldiers realized that they had no chance of survival. They twisted their bodies in the air with ferocious looks in their eyes, trying to land near those fire-spewing tubes. However, they were all chopped down in the air. The rest of them barely managed to climb up the wall, but as soon as the saber slashed down, they began to doubt their lives. Even cutting a pipe crooked? He was clearly under the saber, but after one strike he realized that he was 3 steps away? The Aboriginal soldiers were also a little confused. Why were these long-haired monsters slashing at the air? It was the same for the previous ones, and it was the same for the current ones. Did the long-haired monsters have poor eyesight? Rinpoche didn't look at the fighting around him. He was dressed in ordinary clothes and looked no different from an ordinary soldier. On the battlefield, whoever wore flashy clothes would die faster. Although he was a little cowardly, Rinpoche wasn't a frontline combatant. At this moment he was still standing at the top of the city wall, which attracted many people's attention. Rinpoche looked into the distance. There were fewer and fewer cannonballs falling to the ground. Most of them were shot into the mountain walls in the air. Occasionally 2 cannonballs would hit the mountain walls and explode. A large group of Earth Spirit Clan members charged over from the corner. When the Earth Spirit Clan arrived at Jianghu Stream, there were close to 15,000 of them. They had suffered 1,200 casualties at the pass, and another 2,000 were killed by the explosions. Just now they were forced to bombard the area and suffered heavy casualties. However, there were still close to 8,000 of them, and the number of mounts would double. Their strength had far surpassed the Aboriginal army in Guangbai City. If they were to charge over, the city would be destroyed in an instant. Many people looked past the flames and at the Earth Spirit Clan's army in the distance, which was like a beast tide. Even the Aboriginals couldn't help but feel thirsty at this moment, and they held their sabers tightly. "Your Highness." The guard couldn't help but remind Rinpoche, "You should withdraw. There's no hurry." Rinpoche's expression didn't change as he ordered, "Let the artillery team speed up." "But it's getting less and less effective," the guard said. The guard looked anxious as well. At this moment, chaos suddenly broke out among the Earth Spirit Clan's army. The number of cannonballs falling to the ground suddenly increased, and a large area of flames and smoke exploded. "They are finally here." Rinpoche's mouth twitched. In fact, it had only been a few minutes since the beginning. If it were an ordinary army, it would be considered good if they could advance 200 meters in a few minutes. However, these earth spirits and ferocious beasts were too strong and too fast. If it weren't for the bombardment earlier, they would have covered a dozen miles in just a few minutes and bathed the entire Guangbai city in blood. Rinpoche raised his binoculars and saw more than a dozen figures stirring up a sea of blood behind the Earth Spirit Clan. Broken limbs flew everywhere, and a large amount of blood rained down at almost every moment. Nearby, Li Yuanzhu and Lin Yu were flying around 2 huge calamity beasts. Compared to the huge calamity beasts, they were like 2 flies. If it weren't for the fact that they were mainly targeting the eyes and noses of the calamity beasts, ordinary wounds wouldn't have been felt by the huge beasts. Li Yuanzhu ran from the back of a calamity beast to its head. With a shake of the wooden sword in her hand, more than a dozen sword shadows shot out and slashed at the nose of the calamity beast. A group of huge claws slapped at the lively little mosquito on its head. Li Yuanzhu scuttled to the nose of the calamity beast. The wooden sword grew larger and larger until it was several times the size of the previous one. She pierced the eye of the calamity beast. If it hit, it would definitely be blinded. The calamity beast closed its eyes and shook its head rapidly. Its front claws, which covered the sky and covered the sun, swatted at its nose like it was swatting a fly. It hated this little insect to death. It was too annoying. Bang! The calamity beast slapped its nose hard, causing its movements to stagnate for a moment. At this moment, a figure suddenly descended from the sky and hit the head of the calamity beast with a short stick. To the calamity beast, this small wound wasn't even comparable to a mosquito's stab. It was just like how Li Yuanzhu couldn't create a wound on the body of the calamity beast even with all her strength. However, this seemingly powerless stick hit the head of the calamity beast. The strong skull that it was so proud of immediately cracked and a big hole appeared. However, there was still a hard bone underneath. The skull of the calamity beast was at least 1 meter thick. Without thinking, Li Fu jumped into the hole and hit the skull with the stick again. 3 times in a row, it was as if a fountain of blood had appeared under Li Fu's feet and almost sent him flying into the sky. In an instant, Li Fu grabbed the broken bone wall beside him to stabilize himself. He took a deep breath and plunged his head into the wound. Chapter 12-19. The appearance of Li Fu and the other reinforcements immediately threw the Earth Spirit race into chaos. More than 50 longevity heaven experts could be said to be a force that could change the situation of the war at this time. The Empress alone blocked King Xian and more than 20 Earth Wheel experts, and she also had to suppress them so that they couldn't attack Guangbai City. The Empress couldn't even be seen in the sky, and all the Earth Spirit experts could see was their bodies exploding as soon as they recovered. The Empress had fought with them for so long, and she had always attacked them secretly. Even when she appeared, she would immediately retreat after one attack. She had never fought with them for such a long time. King Xian and the other Earth Spirits knew that she was very strong and was the strongest in the human race, but they didn't know how strong she was until now. King Xian was also at the top of longevity heaven, which was similar to the Empress. However, he didn't even have a chance to fight back. She alone suppressed King Xian and more than 20 Earth Spirit experts. However, King Xian wasn't worried because this woman couldn't kill them. Apart from her, there were only a few strong humans, and they couldn't stop the army of the Earth Spirit race. Even though the ground behind him was plowed by the artillery countless times, he never worried and focused all his attention on the Empress. It wasn't until a giant beast of disaster let out a miserable howl and its mountain-like body fell to the ground that everyone realized something was wrong. A figure jumped out from the head of the giant beast of disaster, and in the blink of an eye, it jumped to the head of another giant beast. More than 10 lines of blood appeared at the back of the army. Then more than 10 figures fell from the sky into the middle of the charging army, causing a lot of chaos. King Xian, who noticed this, was surprised that the human race still had so many strong people. Although they were only at the beginning of the longevity heaven level, and seriously speaking there weren't many of them, and King Xian had brought several times more experts than the other side, they were still a decisive force on the battlefield. When he was distracted, he realized that the Empress in front of him had disappeared, but it was already too late. A huge force hit his head and only half of his body was left. However, after a while, King Xian recovered again. He glanced at the position of the Empress and looked at the situation around him. There were fewer explosions. Every time a large number of explosives fell, hundreds of people jumped into the air and kicked them aside. In this way, the experts who were aiming for the archers became useless. However, the flames under the city wall were still burning, and the tribesmen were forced to jump to the top of the city wall from 100 meters away. To an ordinary Earth Spirit with a Kismet Heaven's strength, a leap of 100 meters was still an insurmountable distance. Almost all of them used mounts of similar strength as stepping stones. Even so, most of them still fell into the sea of fire. Even if some of them managed to reach the top of the city wall, they were already at the end of their rope. They were hacked to death the moment they reached the top of the city wall. In this way, it was like adding oil to the city wall. A small number of Earth Spirits were killed before they could even stand firm on the city wall. The Sage King suddenly felt resentful. After leading an army of 30,000 for 2 years, there were only a few thousand left, and they couldn't even climb the city walls of the human race. If they didn't destroy the enemy's wall, the rest of the clansmen would probably die here. How could he accept this? The Sage King took a deep breath. He took out a black crystal and crushed it. It was the road sign he had brought with him. He shouted, "Black Heaven God, your descendants and people are calling for you. We're willing to offer you blood and flesh, spirit and soul, past and future. Please help me to defeat this enemy." As soon as he finished speaking, the Sage King's body withered. His chi and blood exploded from the surface of his body and gushed into the sky. From afar, it looked like a pale red pillar connecting him in the sky. The Sage King's aura was declining rapidly. At this moment, a mirror suddenly appeared behind the Sage King. A whip lashed out from the mirror and pierced into the Sage King's heart like a spear. It was one of the reinforcements who had been waiting for the right time to attack. After all, the Sage King was at the top of the immortal level. No matter how weak his combat ability was, he couldn't be compared to beginner-level and intermediate-level people who could open up the sky and earth. The Sage King was overjoyed when he succeeded. A pretty girl's face appeared in the mirror. However, her expression changed as she looked up. A terrifying aura appeared in the sky above Guangbai City. The faces of the people in Guangbai City changed drastically. Everyone felt as though the sky was falling on their heads. Retreat. Quick. The Empress felt the terrifying pressure from the sky and her voice was immediately transmitted to the top of Guangbai City. Rinpoche jumped down the city wall without hesitation. The aura was too terrifying and couldn't be withstood by anyone. If the Empress's aura was like a mountain, this aura was like a violent thundercloud that couldn't be resisted. Before Rinpoche landed on the ground, he was grabbed by a big hand and dragged away at a speed that was 10 times faster than Rinpoche's. Rinpoche couldn't care less about who grabbed him. He turned his head and looked at the sky. He was shocked to see a black hole in the sky and a huge, hideous, greenish-black palm stretched out from it. At first, it was only a few dozen meters in radius. However, what was surprising was that the palm grew bigger and bigger. It was 3 kilometers in radius and slammed down with a terrifying aura. Boom. With just one palm, the entire city wall disappeared. There wasn't even a flying gravel. It was pressed directly into the ground. The oil storage tanks behind the city wall that were used to store diesel exploded. When the palm was raised, it turned into a sea of fire. Rinpoche's eyes widened. This hand was too terrifying. Was the owner of this hand the so-called Black Sky Deity? Although he already knew about the Black Sky Deity and that the Empress had injured his hand with a nuclear bomb, he only understood how terrifying it was after seeing it with his own eyes. Moreover, that hand gave him the feeling that it was as if he was swatting a fly to death casually and lazily. It wasn't fast and was just a casual slap. Following which, the second slap landed on the center of the square. Boom. There was no explosion, but the entire square disappeared. A huge pit that was 3 kilometers in diameter and more than 10 meters deep appeared on the ground. Rinpoche's heart immediately tightened. The artillery regiment was gone. He didn't know how many of them survived. Even though Tong Lan and the rest were hiding far away, they were underground and he didn't know if anything had happened. This made Rinpoche subconsciously look to the other side, trying to find some clues from the ground. If the place where they were hiding collapsed, the ground would definitely change. Fortunately, there didn't seem to be much change, which made Rinpoche feel relieved. The giant hand raised again and was about to slap down again when it suddenly paused. There was an exclamation in the air. Then it increased its speed by 10 times and slammed into the Jianghu stream. Rinpoche's face changed. The other party slapped in the direction where the Empress was. The other party remembered the Empress and discovered her. A loud roar and the raised dust obscured his vision. Rinpoche vaguely saw a landslide. One side of the Jianghu stream was directly smashed by this slap. Rinpoche's face immediately turned pale. Could the Empress withstand this slap? Umph. A cold snort came from the sky. It sounded like the owner of this hand wasn't very satisfied. However, the hand shrunk until it was dozens of meters in radius and retracted. The hole in the air also disappeared. Go back. Rinpoche hurriedly shouted. The one who grabbed him was Shiwanya. Without waiting for Rinpoche's instructions, he hurriedly ran back. Chapter 12:20 was a mess. Broken pieces of rubble were scattered everywhere, and they were pressed together by a huge force. There were 10,000 people on the city wall and in the plaza, but less than 1,000 survived. The entire artillery regiment was annihilated. This was the result of the 2 lazy pats of the giant hand. If he had used his full strength from the beginning, even Rinpoche might not have been able to escape. Jingjingtian, are you alive? Those who are still alive, get into formation. Shiwanya shouted as he ran. Send someone to the cellar and bring out the 2 boxes. Rinpoche gritted his teeth and stared ahead. The city wall was in a sea of fire, and the dust from the collapsed mountain covered the sky. He couldn't see the Empress at all. This made him a little flustered. Although the strength of that monster is terrifying, Her Majesty is not to be trifled with. Her Majesty will definitely be fine. Shiwanya quickly instructed someone to fetch the box before he turned around and spoke. Rinpoche didn't care about what he said and just stared ahead. A figure suddenly rushed out of the sky full of dust and crossed the sea of fire. Everyone's heart tightened as they looked carefully. It wasn't Her Majesty, an aboriginal, or a human. It was an earth spirit who looked miserable and had wounds all over his body. Kill him. Just as Shiwanya's voice left his mouth, a shadowy figure darted out from behind. They were all earth spirits. In a short period of time, more than 100 earth spirits rushed over, and half of them were riding mounts. The strongest were at the cardinal heaven level, and the weakest were at the kismet heaven level. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Both sides' eyes turn red. Kill? Shiwanya shot out like a cannonball and brandished his saber, creating several saber lights that were several meters long. However, before he could slash down, several figures suddenly appeared behind the earth spirits and set off a rain of blood. More than 100 earth spirits were killed in the blink of an eye, leaving only 3 aboriginal men and women. They were the aboriginal experts who were brought out of the wall of the two worlds by the Empress. At this moment, 2 long howls and 1 short howl were heard from the sky full of dust. Following these 3 howls, a figure came out of the sea of fire again. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the familiar figure in red. Although he was in a sorry state, he didn't lose an arm or a leg, so he didn't seem to have any major problems. Your Majesty. Shiwanya and a few experts were the first to greet him. Your Majesty. The second voice came from the remaining 10,000 elites. For a moment Rinpoche couldn't hear anything. Everyone was the same as Rinpoche. When they saw the Empress they felt more assured and at ease. Dayo could lose everyone else but nothing could happen to the Empress. It's good that you're all right, it's good that you're all right, Rinpoche muttered to himself. Just now he was really frightened. It was as if he had fallen into an ice house. They've retreated. The Empress turned her head and looked at the dust that had yet to dissipate. She didn't look too good. Retreated? Shiwanya was puzzled. Why would they retreat now that the city walls were gone? Instead of saying that the Black Sky God is the god of the Earth Spirit tribe, it would be better to say that the Earth Spirit tribe is his pet. The Water Empress sneered. That palm strike killed at least half of the Earth Spirits. This result was out of everyone's expectations. No one had expected that half of the Earth Spirit clan's remaining army would be slapped to death by their own god. It sounded like a joke. Everyone felt a little sad for the Earth Spirit tribe. Rinpoche walked to the Empress's side and carefully examined her. After confirming that she wasn't too badly injured, he turned his gaze to the front and wondered, what exactly is this Black Sky God? I have seen this Black Sky God once before, but it wasn't as strong as it is now. Its palm was only a few dozen meters in size. I guess that the leader of the Earth Spirit tribe must have paid a huge price to be able to make the Black Sky God display such strength and no longer have the strength to fight. The Empress frowned. In any case, this Black Sky God was indeed very strong. She didn't know where its main body was, but it could actually attack here. Furthermore, it was so terrifying just by extending its hand. Fortunately, there should be a limit. Otherwise, it wouldn't have retracted after just 3 palm strikes. However, the next time it came, it probably wouldn't be so easy to deal with. After thinking for a while, she put this matter aside and would think of ways to explore the mystery behind it in the future. There were more important things at hand. Just as the Empress said, the remnants of the Earth Spirit tribe retreated, and figures appeared in the sea of fire. The city wall was now level with the ground and had been completely flattened. Li Fu, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, Tengu, and the others all survived. The most dangerous thing was the Black Sky God's palm strike, but its target was the Empress. Although the others were affected and injured, they still survived. As soon as they came back, they sat down and took their medicine. Li Yuanzhu reached out and pinched her left arm and ribs twice to adjust the bones. She couldn't calm down. The palm didn't hit her at all. Just the aftershock knocked her against the mountain wall, breaking her left arm and several ribs. If she had faced that palm head-on, she would have died without a doubt. The aboriginal experts also appeared beside the Empress one by one, and half of them were in a sorry state. The Empress looked around and didn't look good. Other than a few great Xia experts who opened up the heaven and earth domain, the rest were aboriginal experts. However, she realized that 3 people were missing. Needless to say, they must have died under the Black Sky God's palm strike. Unless the Earth Spirit tribe used numbers, it would be difficult for them to keep the aboriginal experts of the same level here. After waiting for half a day for the dust to settle, Rinpoche followed everyone out of Vast Wall City. Even the ground where the Empress fought with many experts had been reduced by 3 meters, and this was just the edge of the palm strike. One could imagine what would have happened if the Empress hadn't avoided it. At present, no one in the human race could withstand this palm strike. More than half of the mountain wall on one side of Jianghu stream had collapsed, and boulders were still falling from time to time. As for the corpses that were swept by the palm strike, they were all under the pile of rocks. In the distance, there were densely packed corpses under the mountain wall, all of which were affected by the palm strike. Even Li Yuanzhu had many broken bones, let alone the ordinary Earth Spirit tribe members. There's no need to dig here. You guys keep watch here, the Empress said to some aboriginal experts who were in better condition. The Black Sky God's palm strike buried more than a dozen Earth Spirit tribe experts here. Given their vitality, they definitely won't die. However, 2/3 of the mountain wall is on top and they can't get out. You guys just wait here for them to dig out and capture as many as they come out. I have to thank the Black Sky God for this. Ren Baqin felt a little strange. The city wall was destroyed by the Black Sky God, but if he hadn't killed half of the Earth Spirit Tribe soldiers and buried more than a dozen experts here, this battle would still have been fought. If the Earth Spirit Tribe had rushed into Guangbai City, it was hard to say how many of the more than 10,000 elites in the city would have survived. This battle is finally over, the Empress said tiredly. Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief. The casualties were greater than expected, but the current situation wasn't too bad. He had previously prepared for the worst, which was to set up oil barrels everywhere in the city. At worst, Guangbai City would become the graveyard of the Earth Spirit Tribe soldiers. In addition to the mountain pass in the middle of Jiado Stream, more than 10,000 people had died in this battle. If everything went smoothly, they could buy a few more years. By the way, where's Suyu? Is he still alive? Ren Baqin suddenly remembered that this guy was very useful, but he didn't know if he was lucky enough. Ren Baqin couldn't find Suyu after looking around and sighed. What a pity. However, at that time they really couldn't care less about him. So many elites and generals from the Protectorate of the South didn't survive, let alone him. However, when he returned to Guangbai City, he saw a fatty squatting in a corner, shivering. His face was as white as a sheet. Looking at him, other than some abrasions, he was actually fine. This made Ren Baqin raise his eyebrows. This fatty's life was really tough. Chapter 12:21. He was not in a hurry to dig out the Earth Spirit Clan's experts buried at the bottom of the mountain. He would wait for them to dig themselves out. When they were exhausted, he could capture them and bring them back as samples. One could never have too many samples. The celebration banquet would be held 10 days later, and the Earth Spirit Clan would need at least a few months to leave the 100,000 mountain range. Moreover, they had changed their route so they might spend more time. That was because there was nothing to eat on the way here. Everything that could be eaten had been eaten by them. Even with the ferocious beasts that had just moved over, it would be difficult for them to sustain the remaining 4,000 Earth Spirits. The people who had been monitoring the Earth Spirits had to continue watching them. However, everyone was much more relaxed now. Back then, the Earth Spirit race's army of tens of thousands had brought a similar number of ferocious beasts. Even the weakest among them had the strength of a blessed heaven, and there were close to 100 longevity heaven experts. If it had been the human race in the past, this group of Earth Spirits would have been able to kill all of them. It took a few days to clean up and repair Guangbai City. Since it was already built, there was no need to not make use of it. Only after everyone had recovered from their injuries did they start the celebratory feast. The casualties of the human race were not small. In the end, Black Sky God's 3 slaps killed 10,000 people. However, by paying such a price, he managed to gain a few more years. According to previous calculations, the longest would be 6 years, and the shortest would be 3 years. If the Black Sky God directly sent down some kind of divine decree, the Earth Spirit Clan's army would attack in another 3 years. Furthermore, his strength was several times stronger than it was now. At that time, it was very likely that the Black God would strike again. No matter how much confidence he had in the Empress, Ren Baqin didn't think that the Empress would have the strength to contend against the Black God after 3 years. However, Ren Baqin wasn't too worried about this. At most, he would just bombard the invading enemy with a rain of nuclear bombs. So what if the Black Sky God descended again? From the previous time, it could be seen that if he wanted to make a move, there were many restrictions. The war between the races wasn't something that could be decided by an expert who was restricted in various ways. After the celebratory feast, Hua, who had just arrived at Anchuan City's largest protectorate, stuck out his tongue at the Empress and said, "I won't be a third wheel and disturb the two of you. Other people only live apart for a few months, but you two have been apart for more than 10 years. Get lost." Ren Baqin waved his hand in disdain. "Am I your biological child? Oh, it's a gift from topping up the game? Since you're my father, I won't complain to the queen about you staying at the brothel every night." Honeysuckle made a face and skipped out of the room. "Ren Baqin, everyone else has a cotton-padded jacket, but my cotton-padded jacket is full of knives." The Empress looked at Ren Baqin and revealed a spurious smile. She didn't really care about Hua's nonsense. Even though Ren Baqin often went to brothels, he still behaved himself and never stayed overnight. But that did not prevent her from frightening him a little. Since they were husband and wife, they had to have a little fun with the whip and candles. Fortunately, Rinpoche wasn't easily intimidated. After so many years, an honest person had also become a troublemaker. He got up, walked behind the Empress, hugged her, and rested his chin on her shoulder. It had been a long time since the two of them were together like this. Relax and be at ease. Moreover, it smelled so good. Rinpoche felt a little restless, but he didn't dare to move. The Empress was already at the pinnacle of the longevity heaven level, while he himself was still at the earth wheel level. He was just one step away from reaching the path to heaven. If he moved, he was afraid that only one of them would survive tonight. That person definitely wouldn't be him. What exactly is that black god? Rinpoche had been pondering this question for a long time. He had also interrogated those Earth Spirit race experts for a long time and obtained some information. The black god had never shown its face. It lived in the so-called God realm. This was similar to any religion. It was too lowly for a god to live with a human. However, the black god could attack from an unknown distance. At that time, it even broke a hole in the sky. This made Rinpoche somewhat believe it. To be able to do this, it wasn't impossible that the black god didn't live in this world. It definitely isn't a god, the Empress said. Of course not. Rinpoche's mouth twitched. Even though it wasn't a god, the black god's strength couldn't be underestimated and could be considered terrifying. Rinpoche was just curious about what exactly this black god was. I wonder how the black god compares to the 6 sky lords, Rinpoche muttered. The Empress was silent for a moment before saying, in another 3 years, I will definitely be able to take that step. Maybe I can pry a thing or two. Okay, Rinpoche replied softly. The gap was still too big and he couldn't even touch the edge or make a guess. Late at night, the two of them talked in bed for half the night. They didn't share their feelings as they weren't like that. After a moment of intimacy, they talked a lot about the situation in Dayo over the past few years and how it would develop in the next few years. After the battle, the others could relax a little, but the two of them couldn't relax for even a moment. 3 days later, they dug out all the Earth Spirit race experts buried at the bottom of the mountain and returned to Dayo. The Earth Spirit race hadn't left the 60,000 mountains yet, and they weren't in a hurry to rush to the wall between the two worlds. Moreover, many people wanted to go back and take a look. On the plain, Shurgan, Tonglan, and the others looked at Rinpoche and wanted to say something. Say it, what's the matter? Rinpoche was in a good mood. Your Highness, can we still graduate in this lifetime? Shurgan and the others couldn't help but ask. Although they didn't personally participate in this battle, they watched it from a very close distance, which had a great impact on them. They really wanted to do something and couldn't hold back some of their thoughts. Do you think the Academy will support you for a lifetime? When I feel that you can handle things independently, I will naturally let you preside over some research. Rinpoche laughed. Come on, the value we have created for the Academy is already enough to support us for a lifetime. Tell me, when will you be magnanimous? Tonglan pouted. In the past, she worshipped the Empress and learned everything she said and did from her. Now, she still worshipped the Empress, but her expression and demeanor when she spoke were similar to Rinpoche's. However, she was much prettier. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that these people were almost there, and they could handle things independently. Almost there, I just need to take the postdoctoral exam. As soon as he said this, everyone's face turned green. Listen, is this what a human should say? Can't you be more human? Believe it or not, I'll jump down and die for you. Supeng looked sad and indignant. Everyone looked at Rinpoche as if they were looking at an irreconcilable enemy. Alright, I was just saying. Go back and divide yourselves into small groups, set a target and let me review it. If you pass the review, each group will be in charge of one project. If you succeed, I will issue you a graduation certificate. After that, you can stay or leave as you wish. If you don't want to do postdoctoral studies in the Academy, you can enter the Research Institute. Rinpoche waved his hand. You can't go back on your words. All of you are already quite grown up, yet you are still so childish. Rinpoche sneered. He sighed in his heart. It could be said that he had watched these children grow up. From counting with their fingers and toes, they were now doctoral students. All of them had participated in many projects and could be considered talents even on Earth. Now the oldest among them was already in his early 30s. Now that the children had grown up, their wings had hardened and it was time for them to fly. Chapter 12:22. The plane arrived at the capital in the middle of the night. The Empress looked out the window at the city outlined by countless lights and didn't look away for a long time. It's so beautiful. The Empress said after the plane changed directions and couldn't see the most prosperous area. This was the second time she had been back in more than 10 years. Every time she saw the prosperous imperial capital, she would feel a burst of satisfaction. This was her country. She saw many officials waiting for her when she got off the plane. Congratulations on your triumphant return, Your Majesty. Congratulations on your triumphant return, Your Majesty. The Empress nodded slightly and looked at everyone. Then she fixed her gaze on the great elder, who was standing with his back straight, and smiled. Not bad. Thanks to Your Majesty and Her Highness, I didn't expect this day to come. The great elder smiled happily. It's your blessing, great elder. This is a joyous occasion, the Empress said with satisfaction. The moment she got off the plane, she realized that the great elder had broken through. The great elder had been seriously injured when he was young, and his body was damaged. In addition, his talent was average, and he and the junior elder had always been the weakest in the imperial court. Now they were both 100 years old, and the limit of a Kismet Heaven expert was 120 to 140 years old. Based on their physical condition, it was hard to say if they could reach 120 years old. Now that the great elder had broken through to the cardinal heaven level, he looked much younger and he could reach 180 to 200 years old. The junior elder was only one step away from the cardinal heaven level, and he had the opportunity to take that step before his death. Apart from the two of them, the others had also improved. If they stayed outside the wall of the two worlds for a few years, they might have the opportunity to break through to the longevity heaven level. That night they rested. The next morning, the Empress and Ren Baqian sat side by side at the head of the court. Ren Baqian handled the court affairs, and the Empress only asked a few questions occasionally. After handling the court affairs, everyone was most concerned about the matter, which was the projection of the battlefield. Since the first battle at Jianghu Stream, everyone had been silent, and the atmosphere in the imperial court was solemn. In the first battle at Jianghu Stream, the Earth Spirit had completely crushed the Earth Spirit. The difference in strength between the two sides made everyone feel depressed. Everyone in the imperial court was a top expert, but after seeing the Empress dealing with the foreign races, they knew what was going on. With their current strength, it was difficult for them to even participate in such a battle. He was indignant. If they followed the Empress to the outside of the wall of the two worlds, many of them would be able to break through to longevity heaven. It wasn't until the Battle of Guangbai City that everyone's expressions relaxed. The continuous cannon fire and the 100-meter-tall wall of fire proved that everything they had done was not in vain. Until the gigantic palm descended from the sky. This is the Black Sky God? Is this really a god? Even though they already knew about the Black Sky God's existence, everyone in the imperial court was still shocked. He could overturn mountains and seas with just his hands. He was not much different from a god. It doesn't matter what this is. All you need to know is that this thing can be killed. Ren Baqian knocked on the long table in front of him. Although they said that, everyone's expressions were still ugly, and their hearts were heavy. He could kill it, but how? Ren Baqian's heart was also heavy. This thing was probably even more difficult to deal with than the Sixth Heaven Master. Even if the universe battleship couldn't kill the Sixth Heaven Lord, the Sixth Heaven Lord might not be able to do anything to it. Since this thing could break through space, it was even more troublesome. However, he couldn't say it out loud. How many years can we buy? The great elder asked. 3 to 7 years, maybe even longer, but we don't have to worry about the next battle, Ren Baqian replied. The Earth Spirit shouldn't cause any trouble in the next battle, but after that they would probably have to face Stainless City and Heaven Master Stainless. After calming everyone down, the junior elder pondered for a moment and asked, should we mobilize the entire nation? Dayo has a population of 100 million. If we mobilize the entire nation, we will definitely be able to improve our overall strength in the next few years, and many things will be easier to plan. Not for the time being. What limits us is the speed of technological advancement, not productivity. Ren Baqian shook his head. Then, should we let the people know about the existence of the foreign races? Start spreading the news. I will arrange this. Ren Baqian was prepared to gradually use the newspapers to reveal the existence of the foreign races. After arranging some matters, there was a banquet in the afternoon. No matter what, it was still a victory. After another morning court session, Ren Baqian and the Empress went to the laboratory. There were currently 4 laboratories in the capital, and the 2 of them were going to study the foreign races. The unlimited life of the Earth Spirit was very suitable for scientific research. There's another batch of experimental subjects. How's the progress? Rinpoche and the Empress walked past a few laboratories and casually asked the laboratory supervisor. We have some conjectures, but we need time to verify them. The main problem is that we don't have the symbiotic life of the Earth Spirit. According to some of the confessions we have received, they share their life with a special kind of worm embryo. This kind of worm embryo has no other functions, but its strong vitality and rapid healing ability. Like earthworms? Yes, many species have this ability, but very few species have such a strong vitality. This kind of worm embryo can be shared with them after they reach the immortality realm. After that, they leave the worm embryo in the birth valley because it doesn't have any power. As long as the birth valley isn't breached, they won't die easily. Rinpoche nodded. This was easy to understand. Not only do they share their life with the worm embryo, but they can also share their life with other creatures with strong vitality. It's said that the success rate is very low. They need to sign a contract with another creature. According to the information we have, this is likely a kind of synchronization behavior, which synchronizes the magnetic field or frequency of two life forms. If it fails, its body will collapse. The worm embryo has almost no thoughts and won't resist, so the success rate of this synchronization process is very high. Is the effect of the truth elixir good? Rinpoche asked. It sounded like there had been rapid progress recently, and there should be a breakthrough in the truth elixir. Yes, we added a phenothiazine drug and a pseudophysalistic plant called Qingsu to the thiopental sodium. After using the aphrodisiac on them, they can forcefully suppress their brain's central nervous system, causing the earth spirit to enter a hallucinatory state. However, it's still very difficult to find information about the Black Sky God. Every time we ask about the Black Sky God or related information, they will enter a state of confusion, and their brains have even exploded a few times. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's very difficult for them to die. I just want to know what I want as soon as possible, Rinpoche said. However, we found something very strange. Even if their body turns into minced meat, they can still recover. So during this process, how are their thoughts and memories preserved? Is it through cells or something else? Did you find anything? Yes, we found that in the process of their death and resurrection, there is an extremely strong existence of electromagnetic waves with a frequency of around 280 Hz. Rinpoche stopped in his tracks, turned his head, and looked incredulous. This is radio frequency waves? Yes, the feeling it gives us is like uploading and downloading data. Chapter 12:23. The person in charge of the laboratory also had an incredulous look on his face as he spoke. At the moment of their death, this electromagnetic wave will appear, and it's very strong. After that, we try to extend the time it takes for them to recover, leaving a blank period in between to confirm this. When they come back to life, the same electromagnetic wave will appear. The former is the outgoing data, while the latter is the incoming data. During this process, their bodies will only have biological instincts. Rinpoche took a long time before exhaling and saying, "This is really an amazing discovery. Are there any more discoveries? For example, where are these electromagnetic waves emitted? How far are they from? How do we block them, and can we analyze the information from them?" These electromagnetic waves will disappear after being transmitted more than 3 meters away, as if there is an invisible door in the air and the electromagnetic waves have entered it. When Rinpoche heard this, he subconsciously thought of the Black God. This was the same method that the Black God used to suddenly appear out of thin air. At the thought of this, Rinpoche's face turned ugly. He didn't know if the Black God would use this method to locate this place. The Black God was too mysterious and no one knew what kind of abilities it had. Make arrangements to separate the Earth Spirit's research and transfer it to another laboratory. I will give you 3 days. Understood. Although the person in charge didn't know the details, he still agreed. Rinpoche and the Empress walked around and understood the situation of this laboratory. After leaving, they immediately arranged for a new laboratory. They would use the original Mount Genesis laboratory. This laboratory was in the capital, and it would be too dangerous if the Black God found it. Even if the possibility was very small, Rinpoche didn't want to take this risk. The Empress asked. She didn't understand technology and didn't know what electromagnetic waves and rays meant. Seeing that Rinpoche was so anxious, she had some guesses. It's radio waves, the same as the radio station we use. However, unlike the radio station, I suspect that it uses electromagnetic waves to transmit and receive data. At the moment of their death, their memories and thoughts are transmitted to an unknown place. When their body recovers, they receive their memories and thoughts. You mean the Black God? Don't memories follow the soul? The Empress understood half of it. Rinpoche shook his head slightly and said, there hasn't been much progress in the study of the soul. Besides, they aren't humans, and the appearance of those electromagnetic waves is very strange. Be careful just in case. Bring the Earth Spirit race to Earth and kill one of them to find out, the Water Empress said after thinking for a while. Rinpoche was stunned for a moment before a smile appeared on his face. Good idea. Even though the Empress didn't know much about technology, this idea of hers was indeed brilliant. I'll go back today and arrange for a laboratory to be prepared. Also, you should go back to take a look. My parents thought we were divorced. The Empress snorted, glanced at him and said, if that day really comes, I will bury your head in the 60,000 mountains. In her eyes there was no divorce, only life and death. After all, it has been 40 years. Rinpoche sighed. More than 10 years had passed since the Empress left for the 60,000 mountains. Even ere Hua was about to reach his 16th birthday. 40 years had passed on Earth. He hadn't seen his daughter-in-law for 40 years, so he could imagine what his parents were thinking. If it weren't for the fact that he controlled the winged cavalry and the large number of Earth wheel experts that he had nurtured over the past few decades, perhaps others would have some ideas. Decades had passed and there were already a large number of man-wheel experts on Earth. However, the Earth wheel experts were still the top experts. Earth wheel experts were the limit. Now, whether it was Rinpoche or others, everyone understood that Earth couldn't produce spirit wheel experts because it lacked something. However, there was still the Horn Dragon Galaxy. There's one more thing before we go back. The Empress blinked and smiled meaningfully. What is it? Go to the brothel that you often go to tonight. It's called Lantern Tower, right? The Empress teased. Rinpoche was confused. Are you out of your mind? I was wrong. Go. Rinpoche decided to bow down to the big boss. For half the afternoon, he and the Empress stayed together in the palace. He didn't try to signal the imperial guards to inform them. It was useless to signal them because they didn't have the brains to do so. The most important thing was that he sat upright. When the city was brightly lit, Rinpoche and the Empress, who had changed into men's clothes, went to Jianghu Street. They walked to Jianghu Street. Lantern Tower, is this it? The Empress asked, but she didn't have any intention of asking. As soon as they walked in, someone came to greet them. Oh, it's a distinguished guest. Sir C hasn't been here for a long time. Please come in. The Empress tilted her head and thought for a while. She looked at Rinpoche and asked, Old driver? Rinpoche nodded his head solemnly. The Empress actually guessed it right. The receptionist felt strange. This old guest didn't look like he was here to have fun. Instead, he looked like he was here to be tortured. After entering the main hall, another madam took over and greeted them with an eager face. The Empress had put on makeup previously and didn't know how she managed to make a fake Adam's apple. In addition, she was full of heroic spirit, so the madam didn't notice it. Call that Miss Zhu over. I have been thinking about her for a long time. I want to see her today, the Empress said in a low voice, sounding somewhat neutral. She has been waiting for you for a long time. She will definitely be happy to know that you are here. Just her. Rinpoche coughed lightly. Also, send a table of good wine and dishes. On the second floor, the two entered a room. The Empress turned around and opened the window. She could see the corridor outside and the singing and dancing in the hall below. You really know how to enjoy yourself. Although he said that, he wasn't really angry. Instead, he was quite interested in the singing and dancing below. Considering that she had been in the deep mountains and forests or the vanguard for the past 10 years, it was already very bitter. Not long after, a girl of 17 or 18 years of age with delicate features walked in gracefully and bowed to the two of them. Greetings, Mr. C. Greetings, young master. Zhu pays her respects. The maid outside the door entered the room, put the zither on the zither stand and then withdrew, leaving Zhu inside. Zhu has just learned a new song. Would Mr. C and young master please comment on it? Not long after, the sound of a zither rang out in the room. The Empress sized Rinpoche up from head to toe the moment she entered the house. She saw that Rinpoche was natural and unrestrained, not the kind of flirtatious behavior that she had previously imagined. Most importantly, even though she spoke to Rinpoche enthusiastically and happily, she still maintained a certain distance from him. With a single glance, it was clear that the two of them did not have much of a relationship. Otherwise, they would not have such an attitude. As far as she knew, Rinpoche had been here for the past 2 years to look for Miss Zhu. She didn't receive any guests either. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, the unhappiness in his heart had dissipated. This fellow was rather honest. It didn't matter if he was just here to listen to the music. Otherwise he would be spilled with blood. The Empress felt relieved. As the sound of the zither entered her ears, she felt that this lady's zither playing was indeed not bad. There was no smoke and fire, and listening to it made one feel at ease. It was no wonder that this fellow had been coming here for the past 2 years. He even treated this place as his exclusive property. Outsiders had only heard of Miss Zhu in the Lantern House. It was difficult to even meet her. After 2 songs, the Empress waved her hand, and Rinpoche allowed her to leave. That lady smiled sweetly and did not say a word. Her playing is not bad. Let's invite her to the palace tomorrow. After Rinpoche left, the Empress played with her wine glass with a faint smile on her face. Forget it. Rinpoche waved his hand. Afraid that I'll be stingy? There are so many musicians in the palace. It doesn't matter if she's one more. The Empress sneered. If something really happened between the two of them, they naturally couldn't be kept. Since there was nothing going on, the Empress would not be a villain. It was rare for her to be generous, but this fellow was actually so suspicious? You don't understand. The atmosphere is different. Rinpoche laughed. The Empress's face immediately turned black. Home flowers don't have the fragrance of wildflowers, right? Listening to music in the palace is not as good as listening to music in the brothel, right? Which flower is more fragrant than your majesty? However, the latter sentence is true. Rinpoche chuckled. It was just like how many people like to go to internet cafes to play games. Listening to music in the palace was indeed not as good as listening to music in the brothel. The Empress gritted her teeth. In the end, she couldn't control her feet. Set a small goal first. For example, remember in 1 second, booksellers. Chapter 12:24. Erhua ran out as soon as she came back. Compared to the Empress, she had a stronger sense of identity with Earth. This was her second home. In particular, the delicacies, technology, and various luxuries on Earth were her favorites. The Empress stood in front of the window and looked at the unfamiliar city through the glass. She saw a colorful river of cars in the sky. The current Wuxia city was completely different from before. Buildings that were hundreds of meters tall could be seen everywhere in the distance. Starting from the city center, the buildings became taller as they moved outward. Projection advertisements appeared in the gaps between the tall buildings and above the river of cars. How do you feel? Have you ever woken up and realized that you have become a primitive person? Rinpoche smiled as he sat on the sofa and pressed a button on the coffee table. Messages popped up in the air. The Empress looked away from the distance and turned around. It's a mess. She didn't like the world outside the window. The world is developing and it won't stay the same. Rinpoche shook his head. Now, the country had implemented new traffic laws and opened up some air traffic control. For example, the river of cars in the sky was a road in the sky that was 100 meters above the ground. It was said that they were discussing the opening of the second level of the sky passage. There were many changes on Earth, and the Empress could only see the changes on the surface. With the development of society, the ideology of the entire society, as well as other things that could not be seen or touched, were the real changes. Even Rinpoche often felt that he had fallen behind, let alone the Empress who hadn't been back for decades. These people are really bold. Rinpoche leaned back on the sofa after reading an email and thought about it. What do you mean by bold? The Empress sensed that there was something wrong with Rinpoche's words and walked over to sit beside him. Rinpoche raised his chin. They are in contact with the 8-armed race. There were a total of 2 planets with life in the Horn Dragon Galaxy. One was the 4-leaf grass planet where the Thunder Barbarians lived, and the other was the planet where the 8-armed race lived. Currently, the Thunder Barbarian King was still searching for the Earthlings. The Earth had failed to kill him several times, and both sides were like fire and water with no possibility of reconciliation. Furthermore, the Thunder Barbarians had dug a large number of tunnels under all the cities to prevent nuclear bombs from falling from the sky. Under such circumstances, it was not strange for Earth to come into contact with the octopus race on another planet. The other planet was different from the 4-leaf grass planet. The 4-leaf grass planet had a continent with only wild beasts and no lightning barbarians. That was why humans had built an outpost base there. However, the other planet was different. There were traces of the Ba Bai race's activities on all the continents. This time, the Earth had learned a lesson from their dealings with the Thunder Barbarians. The first time they came into contact with the king of the octopus race, they had witnessed the strength of the humans, which laid the foundation for the peaceful and friendly bilateral talks between the two sides. Another important point was that the Babai race had a higher level of civilization, unlike the Thunder Barbarians. Rinpoche said that they were bold, not because of their contact with the eight-armed race, but because a team of envoys from the eight-armed race was on the way to Earth with the spacecraft. A group of rabbits invited wolves to their house as guests. The Empress's description was very accurate. The difference between them was even greater than that between a rabbit and a wolf. "I'm counting on you to support Earth," Rinpoche replied. One could imagine what the Babai race would think when they came to Earth and found that it was full of weak earthlings that could be killed with one slap. There was simply nothing better than having powerful weapons and the ability to fly in space. They were so weak that they weren't even worth mentioning. It was like a 3-year-old child holding a rare treasure in one hand and a water gun in the other. However, if there were experts on Earth who were similar in strength to the Babai race, even if they were slightly weaker with powerful weapons, it would be a different situation. The two sides were likely to reach a bilateral cooperation, trade, exchange and mutual assistance agreement. It was very likely that they were planning to use the power of the Babai race to deal with the Thunder Barbarians. Previously they wanted to use the power of the Empress to deal with the Thunder Barbarians, but were rejected by Rinpoche and even flipped the table. This time the Empress would definitely support Earth by inviting the Babai race to her house. Fortunately, the Empress wasn't outside the barrier between the two worlds. Otherwise it would take her more than half a year on Earth to rush over to support Earth. There's a tiger at home and a pack of wolves outside. Perhaps they are planning to use external forces to deter me. The Empress smiled until her eyes were squinted, and there was a cold glint in her eyes. Then she waved her hand and said, "It doesn't matter." Rinpoche nodded slightly. What the Empress said was inevitable. With such a person at home, it was inevitable that some people would have other thoughts. However, this was a small matter and Rinpoche didn't care about their thoughts. In any case, the two of them were firmly tied to the earth. The news was sent through Rinwanyan. He reckoned that it was to let him be mentally prepared and that the official documents would be sent over after some time. Nowadays planes were faster and it was easier to apply for air routes. That night, Rinpoche brought the Empress and Heir Hua to his hometown in the northeast. Decades had passed and this place had changed a lot. However, compared to Wuxia City, it was still vaguely the same as it was in the past. Will Grandpa and Grandma be scared when they see Mother Empress? It's been more than 40 years and you two have been married for even longer. You look just like my sister. It's scary, Honeysuckle mumbled in the car. His eyes kept darting around, making him look like a mischievous spirit. Last time, they even asked me in a roundabout way how long it had been since I last saw Mother Empress. I reckon that they wanted to ask if I had divorced. Then you told them that you haven't seen her in decades? Rinpoche slapped her on the head. Stop slapping, it's going to hurt. Heir Hua covered her head and smiled until her eyes were squinted. He could vaguely see the Empress's eyebrows, but this mischievous look was unlike anyone else. Then they were almost in tears. Even after the divorce they still had to come back to see their child. The Empress's face darkened, and she slapped Heir Hua on the head as well. You two are a mixed duo. Honeysuckle retreated backward. A slap from a Mother Empress would hurt a lot. Her brain was almost slapped out. In a villa area in the small city, the flying car stopped in front of a small courtyard. After entering the password, the door opened automatically. Grandpa, Grandma. Heir Hua slipped into the house. You're back. A joyful voice came from inside. There was also a muffled ant. As Rinpoche and the Empress entered, the expressions of the people in the house froze. They were indescribably shocked. Dad, Mom. The Empress's voice was squeezed out from the gaps between her teeth, and it carried a gust of cold air. I have already said that she has some matters to attend to. Rinpoche chuckled and hung his clothes at the side. The family quickly became lively again. Rinpoche's parents were in good spirits as they inquired about their well-being. However, the atmosphere was a little strange. It wasn't because of the Empress. Rinpoche and Heir Hua were often like this when they came back. Rinwanyan was already over 70 years old. Even if he took good care of himself, coupled with martial arts and medicine, he still looked to be around 50 years old. Rinwanyan was also over 40 years old. Even his son Rin Kai, who called the Empress Aunt just now, was almost 20. Rinpoche looked to be around 30 years old, Heir Hua looked to be 17 or 18, and the Empress, who hadn't been seen for a long time, was still 20. They looked like twin sisters when they sat together. The 70-year-old addressed the 30-year-old as brother, and the 20-year-old as sister-in-law. The 20-year-old addressed the 17-year-old as aunt, the 30-year-old as grandpa, and the 20-year-old as grandma. The Empress's body stiffened when she heard Rinpoche address her as grandma. This table of people sitting together was too messy. Chapter 12:25. Time is like the scouring of water and will inevitably leave traces. The reason why I'm young is that I don't experience the same amount of time as you, not because my lifespan is longer than yours. Just like the Horn Dragon Galaxy, the time here is different from Earth. Give up all this and live in a world without computers or the internet for 100 years, or stay on Earth for 100 years. Perhaps you can consider migrating to the Horn Dragon Galaxy, which is indeed more beneficial for training. Rinpoche sat in a chair with Rinxia, who was in his 40s, in front of him. At this point, Rinxia had completely lost his youthfulness. Rinpoche wasn't surprised by Rinxia's idea. However, the fact was that time was fair to everyone. In fact, Rinwanyin already knew this, so he didn't mention it. Of course, there were some treasures that could erase the traces of the passage of time, such as the jade embryo used by the Empress. However, with so many aboriginals in the 60,000 mountains, they hadn't found a second one in more than 10 years. As for ordinary life-prolonging drugs, they might not be comparable to the drugs that could delay aging on Earth. Rinxia heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed after hearing Rinpoche's words. He was under a lot of pressure to ask his uncle about this matter. He didn't doubt Rinpoche's words at all because they were in line with his understanding. Moreover, Rinpoche rarely appeared in front of people and had been like this for the past few decades. It wasn't just him but also Lu Hua. After changing his posture to make himself more comfortable, Rinxia thoughtfully asked, "Uncle, when do you think there will be a chance to migrate to the Horn Dragon Galaxy?" There were many things on Earth and he knew much more than Rinpoche. However, he had to see what Rinpoche had to say about this matter. Let's see the agreement between those people and the eight-armed race. Migrating to the Horn Dragon Galaxy wouldn't be to the planet where the eight-armed race was located, but to the planet where the Thunder Barbarians were located. The eight-armed race probably wouldn't mind expanding their territory to another planet. Rinpoche and the Empress stayed in this small northeastern city for a few days before returning to Wuxia City. The day before they returned to Dayo, Rinpoche received a call from someone. The eight-armed race had just set off from the space station outside the node. It was a huge transit station that could accommodate 5,000 people, tens of thousands of robots, and a huge amount of resources. There were a total of 26 people from the eight-armed race, and 3 of them had an energy value of 30,000. The highest had even reached 45,000. There were still 2 months before they arrived on Earth. After returning to Earth again, he made a special trip to the imperial capital to meet many people, and the talks went smoothly. When it was time to stand up, they should stand up, and when it was time to ask for benefits, they should also ask for benefits. This wasn't the first time that both parties had dealt with each other. Although there had been several batches of people over the years, most of those who had retired were still alive. The newcomers also knew of this special existence and would communicate with him a few times, so they weren't too unfamiliar with him. This time around, both parties had their own needs and were well aware of each other's intentions. Rinpoche wouldn't make any excessive requests, so it could be considered harmonious. Next, he would return to Dayo and wait for the arrival of the Ba-Bai clan. Before that, he had something more important to do. In the palace of Dayo, the Empress sat in the courtyard with one hand supporting her cheek and the other playing with a wine glass. Following her gaze, she could see Rinpoche sitting cross-legged in the main hall. At this moment, 16 elemental crystals the size of 2 fingers were placed around Rinpoche. Rinpoche closed his eyes and immersed himself in darkness. Dong, dong, dong. Every minute, the earth would jump, and some invisible and intangible things would flow into Rinpoche's body. This was the chi of the earth embryo. With the help of this chi, Rinpoche condensed his essence chi into a ball and used it to collide with the invisible barrier. Although the barrier couldn't be seen, it was extremely hard. After 2 years and countless collisions, Rinpoche only felt a slight loosening. Now, the loosening was getting bigger and bigger. Rinpoche accumulated his strength in the darkness. Every time his strength reached its peak, he would use the chi of the earth embryo to collide with the barrier. After an unknown period of time, Rinpoche vaguely felt that there was a slight difference after this collision. He seemed to have heard it crack. It's about to open. Rinpoche was elated. Open. Rinpoche gathered his strength again and shook it. Open. On the 10th time he felt a crack appear on the barrier. Open. 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 On the 20th time the crack became bigger and bigger. Open for me. On the 30th time the barrier was finally broken by him. The crack completely split open, and boundless energy poured into his body from the top of his head. It was as if a skylight had suddenly been opened in a dark and stuffy room without any doors or windows. Light shone through the crack and illuminated Rinpoche's spirit. The boundless energy continued to pour into his spirit. Rinpoche felt that his spirit was getting bigger and bigger, like a fatty full of energy. At the same time, there was a huge change in Rinpoche's sea of knowledge. The quiet and lifeless universe seemed to be blown by a gust of wind. The entire universe suddenly came alive, and some indescribable changes were happening. The Empress, who was sitting in the courtyard, felt a gust of wind in the palace. With Rinpoche as the center, all the energy emitted by the crystals was absorbed into his body. More energy swept in from all directions, forming a tornado that soared into the sky. The eye of the tornado was where Rinpoche was. Mother, father has broken through. Duohua came out of nowhere. Wow, that's really worth celebrating. The Empress smiled and nodded. She had spent a lot of effort and used a lot of heavenly treasures. Back then, even the treasury of the palace was emptied. Rinpoche had finally reached this step. It wasn't easy. With the energy emitted by the crystals as a supplement, Rinpoche didn't take too long to break through. In just 2 hours, the wind above the palace had dissipated. However, the energy that was constantly emitted was still flowing into Rinpoche's body. After another 2 hours, Rinpoche opened his eyes with a smile on his face. He had finally broken through and skipped the path to heaven. His spirit was connected to the energy of heaven and earth, and he had directly reached the level of the spirit wheel. With a flick of his finger, he felt an immeasurable amount of energy condense at his fingertips. A pillar of fire that was slightly thicker than his finger and several meters long shot out. With a flip of his hand, the pillar of fire was extinguished. He raised his palm, causing the ground to tremble. Then a row of stone needles that were more than 1 meter tall popped out. With another wave of his hand, boundless water fell from the sky. Rinpoche tried using the 5 elements and was finally able to operate them as he wished. It wasn't easy. Congratulations, father. Congratulations. Duohua came in from the main hall with a smile. With a flick of his finger, a fist-sized stone ball appeared out of thin air and smashed toward Duohua's head. Duohua was even faster and disappeared in a flash. Yao Yao's clear voice fell from the sky and said, "You want to hit me as soon as you wake up." Rinpoche laughed and moved his feet. The ground shortened under his feet, and he arrived in the courtyard in 1 step. The Water Empress let out a soft cry of surprise as a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. Now that I have broken through, I understand that I can only be considered to have truly mastered the ancient scroll of methods. Rinpoche smiled. He was extremely happy. The spirit wheel was only the foundation of the ancient scroll of methods, and it was only now that he was able to shine. Chapter 12:26. Rinpoche spent a few days familiarizing himself with the situation after his breakthrough. The biggest change was that the time it took for him to travel between the 2 realms had been greatly reduced. Previously, when he was at the earth wheel level, he needed at least 2.5 days to travel between the 2 realms, and the longest time was half a month. After attaining the spirit wheel level, he only needed 1.5 days to transmigrate again, and the longest he could stay was 1 month. Rinpoche guessed that when he reached the realm of opening up the sky and earth, he would need at least half a day to travel through space. Even if he only had 1.5 days, he still had a lot of leeway to do whatever he wanted. His body didn't change much. It was just that when he broke through to the spirit wheel level, his body was cleansed by the vital energy of heaven and earth, and his strength and speed were slightly enhanced. His physical body was incomparable to that of a cardinal heaven ancient race expert. However, compared to other spirit wheel experts, Rinpoche's ability to communicate with vital energy was far superior. Furthermore, he had the ability to evolve the 5 elements using the universe in his sea of knowledge as a foundation. Combined with the chi of heaven and earth, he had some time to prepare and launch a big fireball with all his strength. The power was no less than a bomb containing a ton of TNT. It was difficult to use in actual combat. Although its power was not small, its speed was too slow. He needed at least 10 seconds to prepare, and his speed was about 100 meters per second. Given the reaction and speed of a spirit wheel expert and a cardinal heaven expert, it would be difficult to hit him unless he was entangled with someone. One had to know that Spirit Wheel and Cardinal Heaven experts could move at least dozens of meters in a second. If it was just an area of effect, it would at most cause some damage. In any case, Rinpoche now had some ability to protect himself. Moreover, it was a true class change to a magical class. However, the true value of the ancient scroll of methods was not here. Rinpoche sat in the garden and looked at the ancient scroll of methods in his hands. After advancing to the Spirit Wheel level, Rinpoche was able to read a portion of the ancient scroll of methods, but he didn't expect the contents to be like this. Will concentration technique. When other people reached the Spirit Wheel level, they had to separate a part of their spirit to link their vital energy and condense it into a heaven-grade weapon. The weapon's power was incomparably great, and it also had all kinds of wonderful uses. Rinpoche already knew about this and had seen a lot of it. For example, Blood Sea Demon's Blood Sea, Ma Hongyu's brush, and Li Yuanzhu's wooden sword. All of them had different functions. But this condensing will spiritual concentration technique was completely different from the others. What it gathered was the power of will. What was condensed was a god. Offering incense, gathering the power of faith, absorbing vitality, and finally forming a god in this world. The power of will and divine sense had some similarities. Ordinary people were unable to excavate divine sense, but by gathering the power of will of everyone in the world, they could gather sand to form a tower. This deity was formed from a strand of his spirit. This deity was his heaven-grade weapon and also his clone. In addition, this deity could also absorb willpower and feedback it to improve his cultivation. As for how much it would give back to him, it would depend on how close he was to this deity. People's hearts were complicated, and they prayed for different things. Health, wealth, men, women, love, kinship, hatred, desire. The wishes of the people who prayed to the gods contained everyone's thoughts. Therefore, even though the clone of the god used Rinpoche's divine sense as the core, it also contained countless distracting thoughts. The greater the connection between Rinpoche and the deity's clone, the more power he received, but the more distracting thoughts he received. On the other hand, if he received fewer distracting thoughts, the power of the feedback would be smaller. If he wasn't afraid of being attacked by countless distracting thoughts and had enough power of will, he would be able to break through from the spirit wheel level to the heaven and earth level in a few years. At this point, Rinpoche finally understood why he had to hover between life and death during the cultivation process of Rui visualization. After experiencing countless deaths, his mind became as solid as steel, and he was able to accept more distracting thoughts without going crazy because of the countless distracting thoughts that rushed into his mind. Originally, he thought that it was to strengthen his divine sense so that he could practice the spirit nurturing technique when he was at the earth embryo level, cross the path to heaven, and reach the spirit wheel level. Now it seemed that he had thought too simply. After reading this will concentration technique, a few times Rinpoche closed the secret manual, closed his eyes and sat there thinking. I don't know who created this technique, but it's really amazing. Compared to the technique of creating a heaven-grade weapon, it's a completely different approach. It condenses the deity and returns it to the body. Moreover, the body and the deity are two bodies, and the power is infinite. The benefits are naturally great, but the risks are also not small. The clone of the deity has its own consciousness and can even affect the body. This technique must be practiced. If I progress fast enough, I will have some combat power in the future when there is a war. However, I have to think about the details. This is to condense the power of wishes and become a deity. The deity is affected by the power of wishes and distracting thoughts. If the believers are peaceful, the clone of the deity will be peaceful. If the believers are cruel, the deity will be cruel. Rinpoche gently tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair. If he wanted to condense the power of wishes, the best way was to form a religion. However, after thinking about it carefully, it didn't make much sense. Firstly, it was too time-consuming. Secondly, the greatest significance of this religion was to gather believers and become a deity. Starting a religion from scratch would take up a lot of time even if the country promoted it. The best way was to find a religion that had a certain foundation, a lot of followers, and a wide spread. As for the doctrine, if there were any parts that didn't suit him, it could be changed. This might be difficult for others, but it couldn't be any easier for Rinpoche. Currently, there were some religions in Dayo. The first to bear the brunt was Buddhism. There were many believers in Tianjin Basin and even in the Chuyin residence. As for Taoism, there were also many followers in the Chuyin residence. However, there were many Taoist temples, and the deities that the two temples worshipped were different. In order to make use of them, they had to be combined and compiled into a unified Taoist canon. This way, the time and effort required was about the same as creating a new religion. As for the Aboriginals, they worshipped their ancestors. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were violent. With the Aboriginals as the main believers, the clone of the deity would probably be violent and irritable. In addition, there was Lin Dong's righteous sect. In addition, there was also the Ajati matriarch who was developing well among the foreign races. However, there were many foreign races and many of them had a chaotic temperament which could easily affect their temperament. In this case, Buddhism was the most suitable. Buddhism? I've always asked. I wonder if that monk saw anything. Rinpoche frowned. What are you thinking about? The Empress's voice came from beside him. Rinpoche opened his eyes and saw that the Empress had unknowingly sat beside him. There's a technique in the ancient scroll of methods called prayers and concentration technique. Rinpoche briefly explained what he was thinking about just now. Prayers and concentration technique? The Empress finally repeated it softly. After thinking for a moment, she smiled and said, "This technique is quite interesting. A deity actually concentrates the hearts of the people. I wonder how it compares to the deity of the long-haired monster." Rinpoche raised his eyebrows and said, "Maybe that's how the deity of the Earth Spirit tribe came about. The techniques might be different, but there might be similarities." The Empress thought about it carefully and nodded. It's indeed possible. If that's the case, the human race might be able to condense a powerful deity. If it's so easy, the human race might not have been defeated back then. How many people understand what happened back then? The Empress said faintly. Let's not think too much about it. When we meet the envoy from the 8-arm race from the Horned Dragon Galaxy, I'll start on this technique, Rinpoche said as he held the Empress's hand. It's better to be careful. Don't be blinded by it or the loss will outweigh the gain. Don't worry, I know what to do. Since there are still a few days left, I'll make a trip to the East Sea and meet that monk. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 12:27. If there was a Buddhist nation in the East Sea, this would be it. When Rinpoche came here decades ago, every family worshipped Buddha, and the shops on the streets were mostly related to Buddhism. There were countless restaurants that were famous for vegetarian food. It seems to be the same as decades ago. Rinpoche looked down at the East Sea from the sky. It was completely different from Wuxia City, which was full of sci-fi style. Over the past decades, the East Sea had been expanded and renovated, but overall it didn't seem to have changed much. The flying car landed in the East Sea and headed for the Jingshin Temple. Most people who came here were like this, showing respect from the bottom of their hearts. There were even many people who walked to the temple as if they were on a pilgrimage. The #1 temple in the world wasn't the result of a commercial operation. It looks quite comfortable this way, the Empress said softly. This style was similar to the first time she came to Earth. Is this an ancient city? I've heard from others that the abbot here is very powerful. I wonder if he can beat me. Hua held her cheek with one hand and rolled her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. How can this be considered an ancient city after a few decades? Don't get any ideas. Rinpoche patted her head. That monk was very strange. He had long wanted to come again, but he always had scruples and couldn't make it in the end. He could feel the strong Buddhist atmosphere in the East Sea, and it was even more so at the foot of the mountain. Even the air was filled with the fragrance of sandalwood. As he followed the crowd up the mountain, he saw people lining up to enter the mountain gate. Many people froze as soon as they stepped through the gate. All kinds of past events flowed into their minds, and all kinds of emotions surged from the bottom of their hearts. Some were crying, some were remorseful, and some were determined. This was the heart-refining sect. The middle gate was for people who came here for the first time, and it had the effect of refining their minds. The 2 doors on both sides, one for entering and the other for exiting, didn't have the effect of refining their minds. As if it was his first time here, Rinpoche, the Empress, and Hua lined up to enter the middle gate. Rinpoche was in a trance as he passed through the heart-refining sect. His second time here didn't have any effect. When he looked back, he saw Hua standing there with a complicated look on her face. She was gritting her teeth with great sorrow and joy, as if she had opened a dyeing workshop. Rinpoche didn't know what this devil incarnate had learned from this sect and was a little curious. Then she burst into tears. When he walked out of the heart-refining gate, his eyes turned red and he said, "I remember the 2 of you fighting together again. It's like I've been beaten up a few times." You're already an adult, yet you've learned to hold a grudge. Rinpoche casually slapped the back of her head. Then he turned his head and looked at the inside of the temple. Compared to the past, the Tranquil Heart Temple was many times bigger. There were countless people in the temple, and it was unknown how many monks were passing through. It was dignified, grand, and caused others to not dare act rashly. Just by standing here, it caused one's mind to feel calm and tranquil without joy or sorrow. Greetings, benefactors. Please follow me. A middle-aged monk walked to the three of them and placed his palms together. Rinpoche immediately understood that the monk knew that he was coming. After crossing a small bridge, Rinpoche looked at the huge lotus flowers in the middle of the pond. A fragrance that calmed one's mind was emitted from it. The last time Rinpoche came here, he didn't notice it. This time, however, he realized that the lotus wasn't an ordinary item. It was very beneficial to him. In particular, the effect of calming one's mind was very beneficial to his future practice of concentration technique. When they arrived at the main hall, Rinpoche first lit a stick of incense, walked into the hall, and bowed to the Buddha statue in the hall. This was what he was supposed to do. He looked up and saw that the Buddha statue had its head lowered as if it was looking at him. He turned around and walked out of the main hall, following the middle-aged monk to the back of the mountain. Along the way there were all kinds of wild beasts such as foxes, black bears, and large snakes. All kinds of wild beasts wandered around the temple and didn't avoid people. They were gentle, deeply influenced by Buddhism, and seemed to have become spirits. When they arrived at the back of the mountain, they saw a middle-aged monk in a white robe standing there with a warm smile on his face. He placed his palms together and greeted the three of them. Greetings, benefactors. Greetings. Rinpoche cupped his hands and was surprised. The last time he met him was when he had just obtained the Empress's martial arts. 60 years had passed on Earth. At that time this monk was around 30 years old. Now he should be around 100 years old, right? He actually looked like he was in his 40s. Taoists cultivated one's nature and life. They cultivated an impenetrable body and had their own way of cultivation. Therefore there were many Taoists who were over 100 years old. Buddhism cultivated one's nature and not life. Their physical body was just a cage and they rarely cultivated it. Rinpoche didn't know how this monk did it. Suwen seemed to know what Rinpoche was thinking. He chuckled and said, Buddhism also cultivates a raft to cross the sea of bitterness. Rinpoche was deep in thought. Great monk, are you the master of great monk Xingrua? Erhua asked. How is Xingrua? Suwen asked with a smile. Not very good. He has had enough of being a vegetarian. He formed a band with me to eat and drink, Erhua said with a mischievous smile. Suwen chuckled and said, he can cultivate both in and out of the world. Arhat also has a wife and children. The Empress glanced at him and asked, what are you trying to say, monk? Suwen smiled and didn't answer. He stretched out his hand and said, benefactors, please follow me. The few of them entered the house and sat down. A moment later, someone served a plate of fruits. The fragrance of the fruits was tempting. Erhua couldn't help but take a bite. The flesh of the fruit melted into a sweet and fragrant liquid and entered his stomach. Then it turned into a warm current that spread to his limbs. Erhua's eyes widened. She knew a lot about Earth. The essence chi here was sparse and there were very few rare treasures. There was almost nothing that caught her eye. She didn't expect that this monk would have such a good thing. Abbot, do you know why I'm here? Rinpoche took a bite of the fruit and asked with a straight face. I know a thing or two. Please go ahead. Everyone in the world is Buddha. Everyone worships Buddha, but they don't know how to worship the Buddha in their hearts, Suwen said and smiled. If Buddha can accept it, so can Arhat. Rinpoche's face darkened. This monk indeed knew. Who are you exactly? Suwen's eyelids drooped and said, I am Buddha. Rinpoche's gaze was as sharp as a knife, but Suwen didn't seem to notice it. Rinpoche thought for a while and his expression suddenly eased up. He smiled and said, if I establish another sect, what will you do? The teachings passed down by the Buddha are cultivated by the mortals and they are Buddhists. Even if it is called the Divine Sect Taoism or the White Lotus Sect, why not? How should the teachings passed down by Arhat be named? What impact will it have? Suwen's words hit the nail on the head. According to him, Rinpoche was Arhat and also a Buddha. No matter what the name of the sect he passed down was or what the content was, the fundamentals wouldn't change. Rinpoche understood this point and pointed at Suwen. He shook his head and said, you have already understood everything. Everything starts from Arhat's heart. Suwen shook his head. but it has nothing to do with me. Father, why are you talking in riddles with the big monk? Erhua rolled his eyes a few times. It's nothing. Rinpoche shook his head gently. He had already understood the monk's words. Abbot, what do you want to teach me? Rinpoche thought for a while and asked. Arhat, you just have to follow your heart. Rinpoche shook his head and acted as if he didn't say anything. Since this was the case, there was nothing more to say. This monk was too weird. He really couldn't imagine how there could be such a person on earth. Rinpoche thought to himself, you have a lot of good stuff here. Whatever you want, Arhat, just take it. Plant it around the temple and receive incense offerings every day. Then it will live. Rinpoche didn't stand on ceremony. He spent half a day walking around the back mountain of the tranquil temple with Su Wen. He even packed a few bags of lotus seeds, impermanent rice and various fruits for planting. The next day there was news. Su Wen had passed away in meditation. Rinpoche was stunned when he heard the news. It was as if he had been waiting for Rinpoche to come and fight him. Chapter 12:28. Rinpoche wasn't sure whether this strange monk was dead or not. If there were bones, Rinpoche really wanted to dig them out. However, it was said that Su Wen had left behind some instructions for his funeral in the main hall when he suddenly dissipated. He was like a statue made of mud. He had suddenly dissipated and disappeared without a trace. Not even a speck of dust was left behind. All that was left were a few pearls, which were said to be relics. They looked similar to glass balls. Some people said that Su Wen had become a Buddha, but it didn't seem like it. The news from the Jingshin temple said that he had passed away. Rinpoche couldn't be bothered to find out what was going on with this monk. The envoy from the eight-armed race was about to arrive on Earth. Rinpoche first went back to Dayo and brought some people back. The Empress was an expert who had 1 foot in the longevity heaven realm, but she was the only one, which seemed to be lacking in grandeur. After all, the significance of one expert and a group of experts was completely different. Besides, no one knew what would happen after the eight-armed race arrived, and he couldn't let the Empress show up for everything. As for the candidates, Rinpoche pulled a few aboriginal experts from the longevity heaven over. In any case, these people only had muscles in their heads and killing people. They were 100 times more barbaric than the officials in the imperial court. Even if they came into contact with Earthlings, they wouldn't be able to figure out that they were on another planet. Moreover, even if they knew that they were on another planet, it wouldn't affect them much. Rinpoche selected Xan Chou, Ben Ding, Su Fang and Zhu Puhua from the list. Xan Chou wasn't far from the intermediate level of the longevity heaven. Moreover, all 4 of them had brains filled with muscles and slaughter. They were boorish fellows who would either fight to the death or fight to the death. This included the giant garden flower. There was a slight fluctuation in the air, and 5 figures appeared in the room. They felt their vision blur, and they were transported from the palace to another place, which surprised them. They were considered the strongest of the human race, but they didn't expect that the prince could bring them to another place in the blink of an eye. Your Majesty. They came back to their senses from the unfamiliar decorations and saw the Empress watching a television program on a projector. The Empress's clothes were rather peculiar and completely different from Dayo's. Her hair was also casually scattered behind her head. Even the majesty of her body seemed to have lessened. The few of them felt that it was strange, but they didn't think much of it. Now that we are here, listen to Zhao Prince Consort's arrangements and don't cause any trouble. The Empress looked up and glanced at them. Where is this? The giant garden flower asked curiously. The chaotic star sea, Rinpoche replied casually. In any case, they didn't know where it was. The rules here are different from those in Dayo. You can't hurt people at will. If you get into trouble, you will be exiled here forever, Rinpoche said. Their expressions changed a few times. Compared to the outside of the wall of 2 realms, there was almost no vitality here. In addition to the strange smell that they could faintly smell, being exiled here was probably worse than being imprisoned. Rinpoche pressed a button on the wall and gave a few instructions. Very soon, the winged cavalry warriors brought the 4 of them away. Next, the 4 of them indulged in the erguoto. Unfortunately, even though the meat was improved from the meat he brought back, it was still far inferior to the ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains, let alone the ones outside the wall of 2 worlds. Not to mention the fact that there was almost no energy in the meat. Fortunately, there were many ways to cook it, and with the addition of various seasonings, it was a refreshing experience for them. After eating nearly 5,000 kilograms of meat and a ton of erguoto for a whole day, they didn't have the opportunity to cause any trouble. The next day, Rinpoche and the Empress brought everyone onto 3 medium-sized flying cars. Half a day later, everyone landed on an island chain in the Pacific Ocean. 8 small and medium-sized islands surrounded and protected a medium-sized island like stars surrounding the moon. This joint base, which nominally belonged to the entire world, was actually jointly guarded by a few major United Nations organizations and a few powerful countries. Mr. Ren Mishchi. Rinpoche saw an old man and a few generals when he landed from the sky. Oldly, I didn't expect you to come. Thank you for your trouble. Rinpoche looked friendly and shook hands with the other party. This old man was also an old man who often appeared in the News Federation. However, Rinpoche had dealt with him decades ago. Oldly has become oldly. I have to admit that I'm old. I'm envious to see Mr. Ren and Miss Chi, the old man said with a gentle smile and a tinge of envy in his eyes. When he first met Rinpoche, they were about the same age. Now, he had the power that countless people envied, but time was like a knife that made people grow old. However, time seemed to have stopped for the other party. How could he not be envious? Those with power were most afraid of time. Which emperor, king, general, and minister didn't want to live forever? Both parties went to the base to talk for a while before Rinpoche went back to rest. That Empress has an energy response of 63,000. As for these 4 people, this man has an energy response of 19,000, and the other 3 have an energy response of 15,000 to 17,000. Mr. Rin has an energy response of 2,800. In another room, Old Li listened to his subordinate and was a little absent-minded. 63,000? When she caused trouble in the United States last time, her energy response was only 20,000. Furthermore, those 4 people are much stronger than those people from the previous time. Those people from the previous time had an energy response of about 4,000. They can be said to be human-shaped nuclear bombs, and they are much more threatening than nuclear bombs. Nuclear bombs are dead, but humans are alive. Such people can be said to be gods, and humans are completely unable to resist them. Our most powerful Earth-class expert doesn't have an energy value of more than 1,500, another old man in military uniform said. It should be the so-called hierarchy. Rinpoche has obviously surpassed the Earth class and is already at the Heaven class. As for the Empress and the others, they should be at a higher level or even 2. Don't consider their threat. As long as no one provokes them, they won't do anything. After so many years, we should rest assured, Oldly said softly. If possible, no one wanted to have such a person in the world who could take their life with a wave of his hand. It was like a ferocious tiger sneaking into a rabbit's nest. However, the example of the United States was still in front of them. They really couldn't be provoked. Moreover, in front of those foreign races, they are the protectors of us humans. The stronger they are, the better. Old Li leaned back in his chair with a calm expression. Without them, how would we dare to meet those foreign races so easily? The Thunder Barbarians on the 4-leaf grass planet have already explained that ferocious tigers will only fight with ferocious tigers. As soon as he said this, everyone nodded one after another. No matter what thoughts they had, they kept them at the bottom of their hearts. At noon the next day, Rinpoche received the news after lunch. He and the Empress brought Xan Cho and the others to meet up with Old Li and some other generals. They took a flying car to a building on another island. The huge platform outside was where the spacecraft would land. There were also high-level officials from the Rising Sun City, the United States and other countries here. When they saw Rinpoche and the Empress, they greeted them with kindness and fear in their eyes. After waiting for half an hour, they saw a black dot in the sky getting bigger and bigger. A medium-sized spacecraft that was 1,000 meters long spewed out 16 blue flames and slowed down as it descended. As the ground shook slightly, everyone became alert. This was the first time that Earth had welcomed extraterrestrial guests. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.